I arrived right on time for my granddaughter's 4th birthday party, but when I walked into the restaurant, everyone had already finished dinner. 14 empty plates lined the table. My husband slid a bill for more than $2,200 toward me and laughed. "You're late, so you can pay for it." The woman sitting beside him raised her wine glass and smiled smugly. Then I noticed the gold bracelet on her wrist. My heart nearly stopped. And in that moment, I realized it was only the beginning of a nightmare. This story starts quietly but won't leave you unchanged. Before we begin, drop a comment. Have you ever ignored your gut feeling about someone close to you, yes or no? Your perspective might be what someone else needs today. Quick reminder, some details are fictionalized to emphasize the lesson. What matters most is the message at its heart. I made it exactly on time for my granddaughter Clover's 4th birthday party, but by the time I walked into Vetri Cucina, dinner was already over. 14 empty plates lined the long table. Cake crumbs dusted white linen. Wine glasses held nothing but sediment and lipstick stains. The scent of truffle oil and garlic still hung in the air, rich and mocking. At 68, I had spent 32 years as Chief Operating Officer at Philadelphia General, before retiring to what I thought would be a peaceful life. I knew how to read a room. This one told me I had been deliberately excluded. The party was for my granddaughter Clover, turning 4, her blonde curls bouncing as she ran between tables, clutching a half-deflated unicorn balloon. She spotted me and shrieked my name with the kind of joy that made my chest ache. Vernon Whitfield, 71, retired patent attorney, sat at the head of the table, wearing the placid smile I had trusted for 4 decades. He looked up as I approached, expression unchanged. "You actually made it, Loretta," he said, voice casual. "We moved dinner to 5. Didn't Catalina mention it?" Catalina. I followed his gaze to the woman beside him. Catalina Mercer. 34, wore a deep crimson silk blouse and a smile that barely masked her contempt. Her dark hair was pulled into a sleek ponytail. "I'm certain I said it might change," Catalina said, her tone honeyed. "Besides, we figured you'd be too busy anyway." I had never met this woman before in my life. I had certainly never received a phone call about a time change. My daughter Evangeline, 42, and a high school English teacher avoided my eyes from across the table. She twisted her napkin into tight spirals. Desmond Greer, 45. My son-in-law and a cybersecurity architect met my gaze with an expression I couldn't quite read. Sympathy, maybe, or pity. "Since you missed the actual dinner," Vernon said, sliding a leather billfold across the white tablecloth toward me, "you can handle the tab." I opened it. The receipt was itemized in elegant script: Dungeness crab appetizers, dry-aged ribeyes, 3 bottles of Barolo, a custom 4-tier birthday cake, $2,247. For a party I had been invited to at 6:15, for a dinner that had been moved to 5 without my knowledge. I pulled my credit card from my wallet and placed it on top of the receipt without a word. Vernon's smile widened by a fraction. Catalina's fingers drummed lightly on her wine glass. Clover ran up and threw her small arms around my waist. "Grandma, did you see my cake? It had a real unicorn horn made of sugar." "I'm sorry I missed it, sweetheart," I said, brushing a curl back from her flushed face. "I'll make it up to you." Vernon leaned back in his chair, one arm draped casually across the back of Catalina's seat. The gesture was too familiar, too practiced. "This is Catalina Mercer," he said, gesturing with his wine glass. "A former associate from the firm. She happened to be in the area and stopped by to offer congratulations." Catalina extended her hand across the table. Her grip was firm, calculated. "I've heard so much about you, Mrs. Whitfield," she said. I shook her hand and felt the cool metal of jewelry press against my palm. My eyes dropped instinctively. Cartier, 18-karat gold, link bracelet with the signature screw motif. I knew that bracelet. 40 years of marriage. And in that single moment, watching the gold catch the light as Catalina withdrew her hand, I stopped being Vernon's wife and became something else entirely, an investigator. I had seen that bracelet before, not in person, but on a credit card statement 11 months ago, December 14th, Cartier, Philadelphia, $3,847. I remembered the charge because it had appeared on our joint visa the week I was selecting Vernon's Christmas gifts. I had assumed the purchase was his surprise for me arriving late, as Vernon's presents often did. I had even practiced my delighted surprise in the bathroom mirror. Christmas had come and gone. My wrists had remained bare. I had rationalized it away. Perhaps he'd returned it. Perhaps the jeweler had made an error. Perhaps I had misremembered. But I hadn't misremembered, and the bracelet had not been returned. It had simply gone to a different wrist. The waiter returned with my credit card and receipt. I signed with the same neat signature I had used on hospital budgets for 3 decades. My hand did not shake. Vernon watched me with the expression of a man who had just won a minor but satisfying victory. Catalina leaned toward him and whispered something I couldn't hear. He laughed low and indulgent. Evangeline finally met my eyes. Her expression was anguished. She mouthed 2 words, "I'm sorry." Sorry for what? For knowing about the moved dinner time and not warning me, for knowing about Catalina, for witnessing my humiliation and doing nothing. I kissed Clover on the top of her head, told her happy birthday one more time, and walked out of Vetri Cucina into the thick August heat of Philadelphia. The sidewalk still radiated warmth from the afternoon sun. Tourists laughed outside a gelato shop. A saxophonist played jazz down Walnut Street. My car was parked 3 blocks away. I walked slowly, methodically, the way I used to walk hospital corridors during budget crises. My mind was already moving through the next steps. The bracelet caught the amber light from the chandelier above. Gold, unmistakable. Mine. No, not mine, never mine. I had paid for it, but it had never been intended for me. That night, I would go home to the Chestnut Hill house Vernon and I had shared for 38 years. I would open my laptop. I would pull up 11 months of credit card statements, bank transfers, and joint account activity. And I would learn exactly how many other gifts I had funded without knowing. But first, I stood on the corner of Walnut and 18th and let the full weight of recognition settle over me. The dinner time had been moved deliberately. The bill had been placed in front of me deliberately. And the bracelet, that beautiful, unmistakable Cartier bracelet, had been worn to my granddaughter's birthday party deliberately. This was not carelessness. This was not coincidence. This was a message, and I had just received it loud and clear. By the time I unlocked the front door of our Chestnut Hill house at 10:30 that night, I had already made 3 decisions. I would not cry. I would not confront Vernon tonight, and I would know everything by morning. The house was dark. Vernon's car was not in the driveway. I didn't bother checking where he'd gone. I climbed the stairs to my study, the room Vernon had never once entered in 38 years. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. The blue glow illuminated the room. Outside, cicadas thrummed in the August heat. Inside, I pulled up our joint bank account. 11 months of statements loaded onto the screen. I started with December. The Cartier charge appeared on the 14th, $3,847. I highlighted it in yellow. Then I kept scrolling. December 23rd, the Rittenhouse Hotel dinner for 2, $340. January 9th, Delta Airlines round trip to Miami, $890. Times 2. I stopped. Miami, February. Vernon had told me he was attending a legal conference, alone. He'd shown me the itinerary printed on firm letterhead. I had packed his suitcase myself, but he hadn't flown alone. I opened a new spreadsheet. Column A date, column B vendor, column C amount, column D lie told. February 14th, the Langham Hotel Boston, Valentine's weekend, $1,200. Lie told visiting his college roommate recovering from surgery. March 7th, legal seafood back bay, $340. Lie told client dinner. April through June, Nantucket Ferry Tiffany Purchase Morton Steakhouse. More lies, more charges. July 9th, Cape Cod Resort 4 nights, $3,560. Lie told visiting his brother Wallace in Maine. I stopped again, July 9th through 12th. I had been in the hospital that week, gallbladder surgery. Vernon had visited me once for 40 minutes with grocery store flowers. Then he'd left because Wallace needed help moving furniture. While I was in a hospital bed with drainage tubes and morphine drip, my husband was on Cape Cod with his paralegal. I kept typing. Line after line, charge after charge, yellow highlight after yellow highlight. How many women sit at their kitchen tables at midnight, highlighter in hand, calculating the exact dollar amount their husband spent building a life with someone else? By the time I reached the end, the spreadsheet had 43 entries. I selected column C and clicked sum. $127,400 in 11 months. That was more than most families earned in 2 years. That was a college education. That was the careful savings of someone who had spent 3 decades balancing hospital budgets down to the last cent. I saved the spreadsheet as 2023_household_utilities.xlsx, a file name Vernon would never think to look for. Then I opened a new browser tab and typed Catalina Mercer LinkedIn. Her profile loaded instantly. Professional headshot polish smile, current position independent legal consultant, previous position paralegal Whitfield and Associates. I clicked on Whitfield and Associates. Employment duration, March 2018 to June 2021. 3 years. She had worked directly under Vernon's supervision for 3 full years before his retirement. She wasn't a colleague who had happened to be in the area. She wasn't a casual acquaintance. She was his employee, his subordinate. The woman who had filed his briefs organized his case files and sat across from him in conference rooms for 1,000 hours of billable time. And somewhere during those 3 years, she had become something else entirely. I scrolled down. Education Temple University Paralegal Certification, 2017, born 1989, age 34. Half my age, exactly half. I closed the laptop and sat in the darkness of my study. The cicadas had gone quiet. The house settled around me with the small creaks of old wood and older lies. Then I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out a navy blue notebook. I'd started this notebook 14 months ago, February 7th, 2 in the morning. I had woken up thirsty, gone downstairs for water, and found Vernon sitting at the kitchen table in the dark phone screen, glowing in his hands. His thumbs moved rapidly, deleting message after message. When he noticed me, he'd smiled and said it was spam. Just spam. I had said nothing. I had poured my glass of water. I had gone back to bed. But the next morning, I had bought this notebook, and I had started writing. February 7th, 2:17 a.m. Vernon deleting text messages. Claimed spam. Did not show me phone. February 14th. Left for Boston Valentine's weekend. Claimed visiting college roommate. Roommate deceased 2019. March 3rd. Pharmacy bill for prescription I do not take. Vernon said cholesterol medication. Checked his bottles all full. April 9th. Unfamiliar perfume on coat collar. Jasmine and bergamot. I have never worn jasmine. 14 months. I had been watching. I had been waiting. I had been writing it all down. I opened to a fresh page and wrote today's date in neat print at the top, August 19th, 2023. Then I wrote, Chapter 2, The Woman at the Birthday Party. Real name Catalina Mercer, age 34, occupation former paralegal Vernon's firm, 2018 to 2021, wearing my bracelet, Cartier, $3,847, December 14th, 2022. Total confirmed expenditures, $127,400 over 11 months. Relationship duration unknown. Minimum 3 years, possibly longer. I paused, tapped my pen against the paper. Then I wrote one final line. Next step, stop documenting, start acting. I closed the notebook and placed it back in the drawer. The clock on my desk read 12:47 a.m. Sunday morning. 48 hours until Monday when banks opened and lawyers answered phones. Vernon still had not come home. I did not care. I had spent 14 months watching my husband dismantle our marriage one charge at a time. I had documented every suspicious phone call, every unexplained absence, every lie that didn't quite fit. But tonight, sitting in the blue glow of my laptop screen with $127,400 worth of evidence highlighted in yellow, I realized something had shifted. I was no longer the woman who stayed quiet in doorways while her husband deleted messages. I was the woman who kept receipts, and starting tomorrow, I would use every single one. 3 days after Clover's birthday party, I sat at my study desk in the early morning light and opened the navy blue notebook to page 1, reading the first entry I had written 14 months ago. February 7th, 2022, 2:13 a.m. Vernon kitchen, deleting messages. The handwriting was mine but belonged to a different version of me. A woman who had woken up thirsty on a Tuesday night and walked downstairs to find her husband sitting alone in the dark phone screen casting blue light across his face, thumbs moving with practiced speed. Delete, delete, delete. I had stood in the doorway for 11 seconds before he noticed me. When he did, his expression didn't shift, just that same placid smile. Spam, he'd said. Getting ridiculous how much gets through the filter. I could have turned on the kitchen light. I could have asked to see his phone. But something in my gut told me if you confront him now, he'll just get better at hiding it. So I said nothing. I poured my glass of water. I walked back upstairs. I climbed into bed beside a man I had trusted for 4 decades. And the next morning, I drove to the stationery store on Germantown Avenue and bought this notebook. I turned the page. February 14th, 2022, Valentine's Day. Vernon left for Boston 6 a.m., told me visiting college roommate Gerald recovering from knee surgery, packed overnight bag, kissed my forehead, said he'd be back Sunday. I had believed him, or rather, I had wanted to believe him, so I'd made his favorite pot roast and waited. But while the pot roast cooled, I had called information and asked for Gerald Hutchinson in Cambridge, Massachusetts. The operator had paused. "Ma'am, I'm showing Gerald Hutchinson deceased. Obituary dated November 2019. I had thanked her, hung up, stared at the pot roast. Then I had opened the navy blue notebook and written Valentine's weekend. Claimed visiting college roommate. Roommate deceased 3 years. I flipped forward. March 15th, 2022. Vernon withdrew $800 cash from joint checking. When I asked what for, he said new golf clubs. I had nodded. Made supportive noises about his handicap. 2 days later, I checked the garage. His golf clubs sat exactly where they'd sat for 6 months, dust coating the bag price tags still attached to the 3 wood he'd bought the previous summer. $800 gone, no clubs, no receipt. April 22nd, 2022, overnight trip to Boston for patent hearing. I called the U.S. District Court. The clerk was efficient. No patent hearings that week, ma'am. Next docket is May 3rd. May 8th, 2022. New cologne appeared on bathroom counter. Acqua di Gio. I had never bought Vernon cologne. In 40 years of marriage, he had worn the same drugstore aftershave his father had worn. When I asked about it, he'd shrugged. Sample from the mall. But there was no sample bottle. Just a full-size $100 bottle I had not purchased. How do you document the slow death of a 40-year marriage, one deleted text message at a time, one cash withdrawal, one lie about where you spent the weekend? I kept reading. June 9th. Vernon came home from errands smelling of jasmine perfume, not my scent. July 3rd. Another overnight trip supposedly visiting Wallace in Maine. I called Wallace. He said Vernon hadn't visited in 8 months. August 12th. Found receipt in Vernon's jacket for jewelry store I'd never heard of. Purchase date visible, item description obscured by coffee stain. I had been meticulous. Every entry dated, every lie cross-referenced, every unexplained expense documented. But I hadn't confronted him, not once. Because part of me, the part that had loved this man since 1983, the part that had built a life and raised a family with him, desperately hoped I was wrong. Maybe the cologne was a sample. Maybe he'd gotten the court date confused. Maybe Wallace had forgotten. Maybe I was being paranoid, seeing betrayal in every innocent explanation. So I kept writing and waiting and hoping the next entry would prove my suspicions were baseless. The entries continued through fall, winter, spring. Valentine's weekend trip alone to Cape Cod. Another cash withdrawal, this time $1,200. Jasmine again stronger this time, clinging to his collar. 14 months, 42 weeks, 294 days. Every single one documented in this notebook. Every suspicion I told myself was paranoia turned out to be truth. I had spent 14 months hoping I was wrong. 3 days ago, I learned I had been right about everything. And that knowledge didn't feel like victory. It felt like grieving someone who was still alive. I closed the notebook and pulled out the yellow highlighted bank statements from Saturday night, laying them side by side with 14 months of handwritten observations. Every unexplained absence now had a corresponding hotel charge. Every cash withdrawal matched a weekend I couldn't account for. Every lie about visiting Wallace or attending conferences aligned perfectly with expenses I had funded without knowing. March 15, 2022, $800 cash withdrawal. Notebook entry claimed golf clubs, clubs still in garage. March 17, 2022, $890 charge. To Boutique Hotel, Philadelphia, no entry, because I hadn't checked statements that week. April 22, 2022, hotel charge in Boston notebook entry claimed patent hearing, no hearing scheduled. July 9, 2023, Cape Cod Resort while I was hospitalized, both documented. December 14, 2022, the bracelet that confirmed everything. The pattern wasn't random, it was systematic. Calculated. A parallel life built transaction by transaction, lie by lie over years. And I had been tracking it the entire time. I pulled a red pen from my desk drawer and began drawing lines between notebook entries and bank charges. Connection after connection. Evidence cross-referenced and verified. By the time the sun rose fully above the trees outside my study window, I had transformed 14 months of suspicion into something else entirely. A prosecutable case. Every unexplained absence, every cash withdrawal, every lie now had documentary proof. The bracelet wasn't an isolated gift. It was one line item in a systematic pattern I had been documenting since the beginning. And now I had enough evidence to act. Thursday afternoon, 5 days after the birthday party, I stood in front of Vernon's locked desk drawer, entering the 6-digit passcode. I had watched him type 100 times without him knowing 080419 Clover's birthday. The lock clicked open. Vernon was at the golf course until 6. I had 4 hours. Inside the drawer, a gray folder sat on top of legal documents. The tab read, "A medical assessment." I opened it. Bryce Stafford, MD General Psychiatry. Comprehensive Psychiatric Evaluation for Loretta Jean Whitfield. I had never heard the name Bryce Stafford. I had never met this man. I had never been evaluated by anyone. The report was dated July 29, 2023, 3 weeks before Clover's birthday party. Patient exhibits significant memory deficits, impaired judgment difficulty with basic financial tasks, and episodes of confusion regarding familiar persons and places. Mini-mental state examination administered on July 29, 2023, yielded score of 19 out of 30, indicating moderate cognitive impairment, consistent with early-stage dementia. Recommend consideration of conservatorship proceedings to protect patients' welfare and assets. My hands were steady. 32 years as COO at Philadelphia General had taught me how to handle documents that could end careers. This one was meant to end mine. This was never about an affair. This was about erasing me. I pulled out my phone and photographed every page, the letterhead, the evaluation summary, the MMSE score sheet with questions I'd never been asked, Dr. Stafford's signature bold and illegible. Click, click, click. July 29th, 3 weeks before Vernon handed me that bill in front of 14 people. 3 weeks before Catalina wore my bracelet. The birthday party wasn't humiliation, it was theater. Staged evidence of incompetence witnessed by family who would later testify, yes, she seemed confused. Yes, she arrived late. You need to understand this wasn't a husband having an affair. This was a man systematically building a legal framework to declare his wife incompetent, seize her assets, and erase her autonomy. And he was 18 days away from succeeding. I placed the evaluation back and lifted the folder. Beneath it lay a second document. Durable power of attorney. I opened it. Standard boilerplate granting comprehensive authority over financial, medical, and personal decisions. I skimmed the clauses with practiced efficiency. Then I reached the signature page. My name was already signed, Loretta Jean Whitfield, in handwriting that looked almost exactly like mine but wasn't. I studied the signature under the desk lamp. The capital L was wrong. I loop it twice. This looped once. The tail on the W extended too far. Mine stopped short, a habit from years of signing discharge papers quickly. Vernon had practiced forging my signature until it was close enough to pass a casual glance. But it wasn't mine. Witness Section 2 names I didn't recognize. Notary stamp dated August 20th, 2023, 4 days ago. While I was cross-referencing bank statements, Vernon was having my forged signature notarized by someone who had never met me. I flipped to the last page. A handwritten note in Vernon's script paper, clipped to the back file after Dr. Stafford confirms target date September 12th. I opened my phone calendar, counted the days. 18 days. The number sat in my chest like a stone. 18 days until my signature, my real signature, would mean nothing. 18 days until I became a legal ghost in my own life. I photographed every page, every clause, every forged initial, every witness signature, Vernon's note. The camera didn't shake even though my hands were. In a crisis document, first, feel later. I replaced each document in exact position. Power of attorney on the bottom, evaluation on top, gray folder closed, drawer shut, lock engaged. 2:47 p.m. Vernon home in 3 hours. I walked to my study and pulled out my phone, scrolled to Sylvia Townsend. Trudy had been my best friend for 23 years. We'd met when she joined Philadelphia General as head of neurology in 2000. She was 66 now, sharp as ever, and had personally reviewed every cognitive assessment protocol in the hospital. If anyone could tell me what was wrong with Dr. Stafford's evaluation, it was Trudy. I pressed call. She answered on the second ring. "Loretta, please tell me you're calling about lunch plans." "I need you to look at something," I said. "A psychiatric evaluation, today if possible." Her tone shifted. "Are you okay?" "No," I said. "But I will be. Can you meet me tomorrow morning?" 8 a.m. My office. "Bring the file." I hung up and sat in my study as afternoon light slanted through the windows. Vernon would be home in 2 hours and 43 minutes. He would ask about my day. I would smile and tell him it was quiet. And I would not mention that I had just discovered he planned to legally execute me in 18 days. Because that's what this evaluation was. Not a medical diagnosis, a legal execution. I opened my laptop and pulled up the photographs. Dr. Bryce Stafford's signature stared back from the screen. Perfectly ordinary psychiatrist. Perfectly fraudulent evaluation. Vernon wasn't just planning to take my money. He was planning to take everything. My assets, my medical decisions, my legal identity. 18 days. I looked out at the garden Vernon and I had planted in 1987. Hydrangeas we'd chosen together. Flagstone path we'd laid over a long weekend in June. 40 years of marriage, reduced to a gray folder and a forged signature. I pulled up Dr. Stafford's name on my laptop. Before I met with Trudy tomorrow, I needed to know exactly who had signed his name to my legal execution. 18 days, not enough time to panic, but more than enough time to prepare. Friday morning, less than 24 hours after finding the forged documents, I sat across from Dr. Sylvia Townsend in her neurology office at Philadelphia General, the same hospital where we had both worked for 32 years, and watched my best friend's face harden as she read the evaluation that was supposed to erase my legal existence. Dr. Sylvia Townsend, 64, a neurologist and my closest friend for 3 decades, studied the fraudulent file with cold precision. She'd been chief of neurology since 2015. If anyone could find the holes in Dr. Stafford's evaluation, it was Sylvia. She didn't speak for 3 minutes, just read, page by page. Her jaw tightened with each turn. Finally, she set the papers down. "This is garbage, Loretta. Complete garbage." I exhaled. "He used the mini mental state examination," she said, tapping the 3rd page. "The 2019 version. Pennsylvania adopted the Montreal Cognitive Assessment as standard protocol in 2022. Any attorney worth their bar card would shred this in court. She flipped back to the first page. And Dr. Bryce Stafford, General Psychiatry. No board certification in neurology, no geriatric specialty, no cognitive assessment credentials. He has no more business diagnosing dementia than I have performing open-heart surgery. Relief flooded through me. So it's not just fraudulent, it's incompetent. Both, Sylvia said, which makes me wonder who Vernon hired and how much he paid them. She pushed the file aside and leaned forward. Her expression shifted from professional analysis to something else. Concern, maybe fear. Loretta, I need to draw your blood right now in this office. Don't ask me why, yet I'm not ready to say it out loud. But I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Why does a neurologist need to draw blood to disprove a psychiatric evaluation I didn't ask? 30 years of friendship had taught me when Sylvia Townsend says, "Trust me, you extend your arm." Of course, I said. She pulled latex gloves from a drawer along with a tourniquet and 3 vials. The needle slid in with barely a sting. Dark red blood flowed into each vial. She labeled them with my name, the date, and numbers I didn't recognize. Then she placed them in a small cooler. "I'll have results in 72 hours, she said. "Don't worry. And don't tell Vernon I drew blood." "I won't," I said. "But Sylvia, 72 hours, she repeated. "Then I'll explain everything." I left Philadelphia General with more questions than answers. But I also left with confirmation that Vernon's conspiracy was built on incompetent fraud. Sunday afternoon, 2 days later, I drove to Evangeline's house in suburban Philadelphia, a tidy colonial with black shutters. The lawn smelled of fresh-cut grass. Desmond's car sat in the driveway. My daughter answered the door with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mom, I wasn't expecting you. I was in the neighborhood." I lied. Thought I'd stop by. Clover appeared from the living room, shrieking my name. I picked her up and carried her inside. The house smelled of coffee and pancakes. Desmond stood in the kitchen, mug in hand. He nodded at me. His expression was careful. Evangeline poured me coffee. We sat at the kitchen table while Clover ran back to her toys. "Mom," Evangeline said gently, "are you doing okay? Dad mentioned you've been a little forgetful lately, leaving the stove on, forgetting dates we'd planned. I just want to make sure you're taking care of yourself." I set my coffee down carefully. "When did your father tell you this Evangeline—" She didn't meet my eyes. "A few weeks ago, maybe a month. He was worried." "Did he give you specific examples?" She hesitated. "He said you left the gas burner on twice in July and you forgot we were supposed to have lunch in June, showed up a week late. I had never left a burner on in my life, and we hadn't scheduled lunch in June. I'd been in the hospital." I opened my mouth to correct her. Then I saw Desmond's face across the table. He was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Something sharp, deliberate. He set his coffee mug down and spoke quietly. "Loretta, I need to talk to you in private, without Evangeline, please." Evangeline's head snapped toward him. "Desmond!" "It's important," he said, still looking at me. "Just for a minute." My daughter had been weaponized against me. My husband had fed her lies designed to make her question my competence. And the only person in that kitchen who seemed to see the truth was the quiet man who had married into this family 5 years ago. I stood. Of course. Desmond led me through the kitchen door into the August heat. The grass was thick under my feet. A sprinkler ticked in the neighbor's yard. He glanced back once through the window to make sure Evangeline couldn't hear. When he turned to face me, his expression was equal parts guilt and resolve. "I've been holding on to something for 6 months," he said quietly. "I didn't know what to do with it, but I think it's time you know." He pulled his phone from his pocket, unlocked it, opened an app I didn't recognize. "I'm a cybersecurity architect," he said. "Part of my job is monitoring network traffic tracking metadata, identifying anomalies. 6 months ago, I noticed something strange on the home network when we visited your house for Easter." He turned the phone toward me. The screen showed rows of data, IP addresses, timestamps, email headers. "Vernon's been deleting emails," Desmond said. "A lot of them. From his personal account, his phone, his laptop. He thinks they're gone, but deletion doesn't mean erasure. The metadata still exists. server logs, backup headers, digital fingerprints. He scrolled down. More timestamps, more addresses. "I've been saving everything for 6 months," he said. I didn't know why. I just knew something felt wrong, and I couldn't ignore it. He looked at me directly. "Whatever Vernon is planning," he said, "I have 6 months of digital evidence he doesn't know exists." Desmond reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver USB drive, holding it between us in the August heat, like it was something fragile and dangerous at the same time. "Everything's on here," he said quietly. 6 months of metadata Vernon thinks is gone forever. I took the drive. It was cool against my palm, surprisingly light for something that might hold the key to my entire defense. "Tell me exactly what happened," I said. Desmond glanced back at the kitchen window. Evangeline was washing dishes, her back to us. 6 months ago," he said, voice low. "I came downstairs at 3 a.m. for water. Vernon was at our computer in the den deleting emails. Not just deleting, he was emptying the trash clearing browser, history wiping everything. I stood in the doorway for maybe 30 seconds. He never noticed me. Then I went back upstairs." He paused. A lawnmower hummed 3 houses down. "The next day, I recovered the metadata from the server logs." He continued, "I'm a cybersecurity architect, Loretta. It's what I do. When someone deletes an email, the message content is gone, but the metadata stays on the server. Timestamps, IP addresses, sender and recipient information, subject lines. Everything he thought was erased." "How much is on here?" I asked. 6 months, he said. February through July, hundreds of deleted messages between Vernon and email addresses I didn't recognize. I didn't read the content, I couldn't. But the patterns are there. The timing, the coordination. He met my eyes directly. "I didn't know what to do with this," he said. "But I knew you would." I closed my hand around the USB drive. "Thank you, Desmond," I said. "Don't tell Evangeline yet. I need to understand what's on this drive before she knows her father is being investigated. Can you do that for me?" He nodded. "Of course. But Loretta, when the time comes, when she needs to know, I'll tell her. I won't let her think you kept this from her." When the time comes, I agreed. My son-in-law had been protecting me for 6 months without me knowing. While my husband built a conspiracy to erase me, the quiet man who married my daughter had been building my defense. I drove home with the USB drive in my purse and called Dr. Sylvia Townsend from the car. "I need a referral," I said when she answered. "An attorney, elder law, someone who handles fraud cases." There was a pause. Then, "Celeste Caldwell. She's the best in Pennsylvania. I'll text you her number." Early September, 10 days after Desmond handed me the USB drive, and 7 days before Vernon's target filing date, I sat in a high-rise law office on the 22nd floor of 1650 Market Street in Center City, Philadelphia. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. The Benjamin Franklin Parkway stretched out below flags, snapping in the wind I couldn't hear through the glass. Attorney Celeste Caldwell, 58 elder law specialist, sat across from me at a polished conference table. She wore a charcoal suit and silver-framed glasses. Her hands were folded on the table perfectly still as I methodically presented my evidence. The fake psychiatric evaluation, the forged power of attorney with Vernon's handwritten note, 11 months of bank statements with my yellow highlights, the navy blue notebook with 14 months of documented lies, and finally, Desmond's USB drive. She listened without interruption, just took detailed notes in neat handwriting on a legal pad. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me. "Let me make sure I understand the timeline," she said. "Fake psychiatric evaluation 3 weeks before a public humiliation at a family event. Forged power of attorney with a specific filing deadline. Systematic financial drainage masked as routine expenses. And digital evidence of coordinated communication." She paused. "Mrs. Whitfield, you are not an isolated victim. This is a pattern." Something in my chest loosened. "I've been practicing elder law in Pennsylvania for 22 years, Celeste continued. "I have seen this exact scheme 7 times. A spouse, usually male, targets a partner with independent assets. Fake medical diagnosis, rushed conservatorship, filing financial control designed to look legitimate until it's too late. She leaned forward. And every single time I've taken the case, I won. Every single time. You need to understand what it means to hear, "I've seen this 7 times before." It means you're not crazy. It means you're not paranoid. It means there's a playbook and someone who knows how to destroy it. "What's the first step?" I asked. Celeste pulled the fraudulent evaluation toward her and tapped Dr. Stafford's signature. "We investigate Dr. Bryce Stafford," she said. "A psychiatrist willing to sign fraudulent evaluations is a doctor with vulnerabilities, financial problems, licensing issues, personal indiscretions. Something made him say yes to your husband. We find those vulnerabilities, we flip him, and Vernon's conspiracy collapses from the inside out." She opened her laptop and began typing. "I have a private investigator who specializes in medical fraud," she said. "He'll pull Dr. Stafford's financial records, licensing history, court records, everything. If there's leverage, we'll find it." "How long will that take?" I asked. 72 hours, she said. "Maybe less." She pulled a fresh legal pad from her desk drawer and wrote a single name at the top, Dr. Bryce Stafford. "A psychiatrist willing to commit medical fraud is a man with secrets," she said, uncapping her pen. "Before we confront your husband, we find out exactly what Dr. Stafford is hiding, and then we use it." She looked up at me. "Your husband filed a target date of September 12th. That's 7 days from now. We're not going to stop him from filing. We're going to let him think everything's proceeding as planned. Then the day before he goes to court, we hit him with everything." "Why wait?" I asked. "Because the longer he thinks you're unaware, the more confident he gets," Celeste said. "Confident people make mistakes. They get sloppy. They leave trails. And when he walks into that courthouse thinking he's about to win, we'll be waiting with evidence he doesn't even know exists." She closed the legal pad and stood. "Mrs. Whitfield, I'm going to be very direct with you. Your husband is planning to legally erase you. But he made 3 critical errors. First, he underestimated you. Second, he hired incompetent co-conspirators. And third, he didn't know your son-in-law is a cybersecurity architect." She extended her hand. I shook it. "We're going to win this," she said. "But we're going to do it smart. Let me handle Dr. Stafford. You go home. Act normal. Don't let Vernon know anything has changed. Can you do that?" "I've been doing it for 14 months, I said. She smiled. "Then 7 more days should be easy." 1 week after Celeste wrote Dr. Bryce Stafford's name on her legal pad, she called me into her office with the kind of controlled excitement that told me she had found exactly what she was looking for. I took the elevator to the 22nd floor and sat across from her at the conference table. Through the windows behind her, Philadelphia stretched out under a gray September sky. Celeste slid a folder across the table. I opened it. The first page was a credit report. Dr. Bryce Stafford, age 52. Current outstanding debt, $180,000. Creditors, Borgata Casino Caesars, Atlantic City Harrah's Resort. I turned the page. Pennsylvania State Medical Board official notice, dated March 2022. Subject license review proceeding. Reason prescription malpractice incident, 2021. His medical license was under active review. I turned to the next page. A bank transaction record from Desmond's metadata. Mercer Holdings, LLC to Dr. Bryce Stafford. Amount $25,000, payment type cash. Date July 15, 2023. 2 weeks before the fake evaluation was dated. Mercer Holdings, Celeste said. Registered agent Catalina Mercer, incorporated in Delaware 6 months ago. Single member LLC. No business activity except 1 transaction. $25,000 in cash to a psychiatrist with a gambling problem and a medical license hanging by a thread. I set the folder down. "He's desperate," I said. "Exactly," Celeste said. "Dr. Stafford is not your enemy. He's your key. The question is, do we squeeze him now or wait until the moment his testimony does maximum damage to your husband? What does it cost to buy a doctor's signature on a document that erases someone's legal existence? Apparently $25,000 and the promise of silence about a gambling problem. What happens if we wait and he warns Vernon?" I asked. Celeste smiled. Men like Dr. Stafford don't warn anyone. They panic, they lie, and they try to save themselves. When we're ready, we'll offer him immunity in exchange for testimony. He'll take it. She closed the folder. For now, we let Vernon think everything is proceeding as planned. September 12th is in 3 days. Let him file. Let him walk into court confident. And then we dismantle his entire case. I left Celeste's office and drove straight to Desmond's house. He was home alone. We sat in his den while he opened the USB drive on his laptop. "I've been analyzing the metadata," he said. "Most of Vernon's deleted emails were sent from your Chestnut Hill house, but there's a cluster of 47 messages over 8 months sent from a different IP address." He clicked on one. A string of numbers appeared. "This IP address is a residential building, 312 Arch Street, Old City, Philadelphia. The emails were sent from apartment 7D. I pulled out my phone and opened Pennsylvania's business entity search, typed RH Property Management, LLC. Registered agent Vernon Whitfield, date of formation January 2023. I opened our joint bank account and searched property management. 12 transactions appeared, $4,200 each, January through August, monthly debits labeled RH Property Management, maintenance fee. I had seen those charges. I had assumed they were for our Chestnut Hill house maintenance, but they weren't. They were rent. $4,200 per month, 8 months, $33,600 total. I had been funding Vernon's secret apartment since January. "Desmond," I said, "can you find the exact address?" He pulled up a reverse lookup. 312 Arch Street, Unit 7D, luxury one-bedroom apartment, 7th floor, monthly rent, $4,200. "I need to see it," I said. "Now," Desmond asked. "Right now." 20 minutes later, we stood on Arch Street in Old City, Philadelphia, as the September sun dropped below the buildings. The apartment building rose 7 stories, brick and glass, with a doorman visible through the lobby. I looked up, counted floors. 7th floor, 3rd window from the left. The lights were on. Warm yellow light glowed behind sheer curtains. Someone was moving inside. A shadow crossed the window, then another. I stood on Arch Street in the September darkness, looking up at a 7th floor window glowing with warm light. My husband was in there. So was she. And I was standing in the cold with a USB drive full of metadata and a son-in-law who had become my most loyal ally. "They're home," Desmond said quietly. I didn't respond. I just watched the window, watched shadows move behind the curtains, watched the life my husband had built with my money in an apartment I had paid for without knowing it existed. I wondered how many dinners Vernon had eaten at that window while I sat alone at our table in Chestnut Hill. How many mornings he had woken up in that bed before driving home to shower and pretend he'd been at the golf course. How many lies could fit inside $4,200 a month? Desmond touched my arm gently. "We should go. If they come out—" "I know," I said, but I took one more photograph with my phone. The building, the 7th floor, the window with warm lights and shadows moving behind curtains. Evidence. Because that's what this was now. Not heartbreak, not betrayal. Evidence. I looked up at that 7th floor window, the lights warm and steady against the Philadelphia night. Desmond stood beside me, silent, letting me process what we both knew. Vernon was up there right now in the apartment I had been unknowingly funding for 8 months with the woman who had orchestrated his conspiracy. I wondered how many dinners my husband had eaten at that window while I sat alone at our table in Chestnut Hill, setting a place for him that would remain empty. And I had the photographs, the bank records, the LLC registration, the metadata proving every email sent from that address, physical proof of an affair. But as I stood there in the darkness, phone in hand, I realized something. Physical proof of an affair was about to become the least of my concerns. I was deadheading roses along my garden fence on a late September afternoon when my neighbor, Constance Holbrook, stopped on her evening walk, her expression hovering somewhere between concern and discomfort, the look people wear when they're about to ask if you're losing your mind. My neighbor, Constance Holbrook, 66 and a retired banker, stopped at the fence with a troubled expression. "Loretta," she said, glancing back toward her house as if checking whether anyone was watching. "I need to ask you something, and please don't take this the wrong way. Are you doing okay? I set down my pruning shears. I'm fine, Constance. Why do you ask? She shifted her weight, crossed her arms, uncrossed them. A woman at the community association meeting last week, she said she was a family friend, mentioned you've been going through a difficult phase. Forgetting things, sometimes not recognizing people. The family is worried, she said. I felt something cold settle in my chest. What did this family friend look like? I asked, voice perfectly calm. Younger woman, Constance said. Maybe mid-30s, dark hair, very polished. She seemed genuinely concerned about you. Catalina had stood up at a community association meeting and told my neighbors I was losing my mind. Constance, I said, meeting her eyes directly. I appreciate your concern, but I can assure you I have never been more clear-headed in my entire life. That woman is not a family friend, and whatever she told you is a lie. Constance's eyes widened. Loretta, I thank you for checking on me, I said, picking up my pruning shears. I mean that, but I'm fine. She nodded slowly, clearly uncertain what to believe. Then she continued her walk. I went inside, locked the door, and called Attorney Celeste Caldwell. They're not just building a legal case anymore, I said when she answered. They're building a public narrative. Community meetings concern neighbors, worried family friends. They're accelerating their timeline, which means they're getting scared. You need to understand what it means when your husband's mistress stands up at a community meeting and tells your neighbors you're losing your mind. It's not slander. It's stage setting. It's building an audience of witnesses who will nod sympathetically when the conservatorship papers are filed. Good, Celeste said. Scared people make mistakes. Document everything. If any other neighbors approach you, stay calm, stay clear, and take notes. I hung up and returned to my study. Vernon was at the golf course. He wouldn't be home until 6. At 8:15 that evening, my phone rang. Patricia Dawson, 55, and now chief pharmacist at my former hospital, called with urgent concern in her voice. Loretta, she said without preamble. Something strange happened last week. Dr. Bryce Stafford, I recognized the name from the medical board notices, called our pharmacy department asking very specific questions about lorazepam. I sat up straighter. What kind of questions? He was asking very specific questions about lorazepam, Patricia said. Long-term effects, how it presents in routine checkups, what symptoms look like from the outside. He framed it as academic research, but the questions weren't academic. They were practical. There was a pause. When Trudy spoke again, her voice was careful. Memory impairment, she said. Confusion, difficulty concentrating, spatial disorientation, essentially symptoms that could be mistaken for early-stage dementia. The room tilted. Loretta. Trudy continued, if someone has been giving you lorazepam without your knowledge, that would be criminal, I finished. That would be criminal. I hung up and sat in the silence of my study. The tea. Every night for 8 months. Vernon would bring it to me in our bedroom, still steaming with that concerned husband smile. This will help you sleep better, darling. Chamomile, he said. With honey, just the way I liked it. And I drank it. Every single night I drank it. I thought about the mornings I'd woken up foggy, the afternoons I'd walked into a room and forgotten why I'd come, the moments I'd paused mid-sentence, searching for a word that should have been right there. I had attributed it to stress, to age, to the normal cognitive changes of a 68-year-old woman. But it wasn't normal. It was chemical. I looked down at my desk. The cup of tea Vernon had brought me 30 minutes earlier sat beside my laptop, still steaming. I'd been on the phone with Trudy and hadn't touched it. I picked it up with steady hands, walked to the kitchen, stood at the sink. The tea was pale amber. It smelled like chamomile and honey, exactly like it always did. I poured it down the drain and watched it spiral into the disposal. Then I pulled out my phone and called Dr. Sylvia Townsend. She answered on the first ring. Loretta, I was hoping you'd call. I'll have results in 72 hours, she said, but I won't share them until I've ruled out every alternative explanation. If I'm right about what I suspect, I need to be absolutely certain before I say it out loud. Will you trust me? Of course, I said. Then don't ask me again until I call you, and don't mention this to anyone. Yes, Sylvia said quietly. I finally understand, I said. You suspected Vernon was drugging me. That's why you drew blood. You were testing for benzodiazepines." There was a long silence. "Yes," she said finally. "The results came back positive. Low-dose lorazepam, consistent with chronic exposure over several months. I didn't tell you immediately because I needed to be sure. I needed to rule out every other possibility." "And now?" I asked. "Now." Sylvia said, "We have medical proof. Blood work dated August 27th showing lorazepam in your system despite no prescription, no medical necessity, and no knowledge of ingestion. Loretta, your husband, has been poisoning you." I closed my eyes. "Not just to control my money," I said, "to manufacture the dementia he claimed to diagnose, to create the symptoms that would justify the conservatorship." "Yes," Sylvia said. I hung up with Sylvia and sat in the silence of my study, staring at the empty cup I'd just rinsed and placed in the dish rack. Vernon would be home in 20 minutes. He would ask if I'd enjoyed the tea. I would smile and tell him it was perfect. And tomorrow night, he would bring me another cup. And I would accept it with the same grateful smile I'd worn for 8 months. Because now I understood what Attorney Caldwell had meant when she said, "Let Vernon think everything is proceeding as planned." The blood work had confirmed what I already knew, but first I needed to discover the full scope of Vernon's plan. And that meant drinking the tea he thought was erasing my mind while documenting every single dose. The morning after I poured Vernon's drug tea down the sink, Desmond arrived at Attorney Caldwell's office with his laptop and a face that told me he'd found something we needed to see immediately. I took the elevator to the 22nd floor. Celeste was already there, coffee in hand. Desmond opened his laptop and turned it toward us. "I decrypted more emails from the metadata," he said. "This one was sent from Vernon to Catalina 4 days ago, September 23rd. He clicked on the file. I read it twice. Small family gathering. October 15th, 7 p.m. at our place. Make sure notary is positioned by 7. E will witness, she won't know what she's signing witness for. If L refuses in front of everyone, document everything. Perfect emotional instability. Evidence." Celeste leaned forward, reading over my shoulder. When she finished, she sat back and smiled. "They're planning to ambush you in your own home," she said, "with your daughter as an unwitting accomplice and a notary ready to execute documents on the spot. Any resistance you show will be framed as irrational behavior in front of family witnesses. It's elegant, actually, and completely illegal." She pulled a legal pad toward her and wrote, "October 15th, 7 p.m. "Mrs. Whitfield, they just made a critical mistake," she said. "They gave us their timeline. We now have 18 days not to react but to set our own trap. Now we know their date, which means we know ours." "What do we do?" I asked. "You prepare," Celeste said. "First we protect your assets. Then we protect your legal identity. And then on October 14th, 1 day before their planned ambush, we strike first." An hour later, I walked into Citizens Bank's Rittenhouse Square branch and asked to speak with the manager. Gerald Ashford, the branch manager, reviewed my security requests with the methodical precision of someone who had seen fraud attempts before. He was in his early 50s, wearing a dark suit and wire-rimmed glasses. "I need biometric security flags placed on all accounts under my name," I said. "Both personal and joint. Any changes to account authorizations, beneficiaries, or power of attorney designations must require my in-person verification with government-issued photo identification." Gerald nodded, typing. "And I need a permanent notation in my file." I continued. "I am not and will not be executing any durable power of attorney. I'm implementing dual-factor biometric authentication," he said. "Fingerprint and facial recognition. Any attempt to modify account control without your physical presence will trigger immediate lockdown and fraud alert. This goes into effect within the hour." I was building a fortress around my life, one biometric security flag at a time, while Vernon was building his trap, one forged signature at a time. The difference was, mine was legal. If anyone attempts to present power of attorney documents claiming authority over my accounts, I said, "I want immediate notification and a full fraud investigation." Gerald made another note. "Done. The system won't just reject unauthorized access. It will document the fraud attempt with timestamps, IP addresses, and photographic evidence." I left the bank at noon and drove to Center City, Philadelphia. Margaret Quinlan, my trust attorney for the past 15 years, confirmed the protected status of every dollar I had quietly transferred. She was 63 with silver hair and the kind of sharp legal mind that had guided me through complex estate planning for decades. Let me confirm the timeline. Margaret said, reviewing files. Beginning 14 months ago, February 2022, you initiated monthly transfers from joint account, ending 4472 into the Whitfield Prenuptial Trust. Amounts ranging from $40,000 to $70,000. Total transferred $890,000. She looked up at me. All funds sourced from your documented salary and performance bonuses from Philadelphia General 1991 through 2023. Tax records verify every deposit. Under Pennsylvania law and the terms of your 1983 prenuptial agreement, Margaret continued, these assets are classified as separate property with protected status. Your husband cannot claim, attach, or claw back these funds under any circumstance, divorce, conservatorship, petition, or bankruptcy. They are completely insulated. She closed the file. The joint account currently holds $47,000. Everything else is beyond his legal reach. You need to understand what it means to move $890,000 without your spouse noticing. It means you know exactly how much attention he's paying to the accounts he plans to steal, which is none. For 14 months while Vernon built his conspiracy to steal my assets, I was quietly moving those same assets beyond his reach. He'd been planning to control everything I owned, but most of what I owned didn't exist where he thought it did anymore. Margaret, I said, if Vernon files a conservatorship petition claiming control of my finances, what will he actually gain access to? The joint account, she said. $47,000, that's it. The prenuptial trust, your personal retirement accounts, your investment portfolios, all protected under the 1983 agreement. He signed that prenup 40 years ago. It's ironclad. I thought about Vernon's forged power of attorney, the fake dementia evaluation, the months of planning the bribes, the conspiracy with Catalina and Dr. Stafford, all of it designed to seize assets that were no longer there. Does he know? Margaret asked. About the transfers? No, I said. The joint account statements show regular fluctuations. He never looked closely enough to see the pattern. Then he's planning a heist, Margaret said, of a vault you've already emptied. I walked out of the trust attorney's office at 4:47 p.m. on the last Friday of September with a folder containing ironclad documentation that $890,000 of my assets were permanently beyond Vernon's legal reach. The joint account he was planning to seize through conservatorship, $47,000. The prenuptial trust, he didn't know I'd been funding for 14 months, everything that truly mattered. Vernon could try every trick in his conspiracy playbook, the forged signatures, the fraudulent medical evaluation, the chemical poisoning, the family ambush with Evangeline as unwitting witness. But he would never touch what I had already protected. I sat in my car in the parking garage and pulled out my phone, opened my calendar. October 15th, 7 p.m. glowed on the screen, Vernon's planned ambush. I added a new entry for October 14th, 9 a.m. strike first, and in 72 hours I would discover I wasn't the only one preparing to act. The first Monday of October, I answered my front door at 7:30 in the evening to find Vernon's older brother Wallace standing on my porch in the rain looking like he'd aged 20 years since I'd last seen him at Christmas. Wallace Whitfield, 74. Vernon's older brother and a retired accountant sat at my kitchen table looking 20 years older than when I'd last seen him. His hands shook as he wrapped them around the mug of coffee I'd poured. Rain drummed against the windows. Vernon was at a, quote, dinner meeting, unquote, which meant the old city apartment. Loretta, Wallace said, voice hoarse. Vernon told me about this plan 8 months ago. February. He was going to have you declared incompetent, take control of your assets, and I stayed silent. I sat across from him, waited. He promised my inheritance from Mother's estate would stay intact. Wallace continued, $200,000. I chose money over doing the right thing, Loretta. I can't sleep anymore. He pulled his phone from his pocket and placed it on the table between us. This is our conversation, he said. From February 7th. I recorded it because I don't know why. Maybe some part of me knew I'd need proof that I tried to talk him out of it. I didn't try hard enough, but it's all here. He pressed play. Vernon's voice filled my kitchen. Not the gentle tone he used when he brought me tea. Not the concerned husband voice from the birthday party. This was cold, methodical, clinical. The psychiatrist will sign the evaluation by mid-July. I'll have the power of attorney ready by September. Once she's declared incompetent, I file for conservatorship, liquidate the joint assets, and we're done. Wallace, your inheritance is safe. I'm not touching Mother's trust. But Loretta's personal assets, those fund my new life. I sat at my kitchen table listening to my husband's voice on Wallace's phone, calmly explaining how he would erase my legal existence. And I realized the man I married 40 years ago was gone. This voice belonged to a stranger who happened to share his name. Wallace's voice came through the recording next. Vernon, this is wrong. You're talking about destroying her. I'm talking about starting over, Vernon's voice said. With someone who doesn't make me feel like a failure every time she walks into a room. Loretta had her career. Now it's my turn. The recording ended. Wallace looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. I'm sorry, I should have told you in February. You're telling me now, I said. Can I have a copy of that recording? He nodded and sent it to my phone. The next morning at 9 a.m., I sat in Attorney Celeste Caldwell's office with Wallace's audio file loaded on my laptop and a new visitor sitting across the conference table. Agent Conrad Garrett, 49, FBI Elder Fraud Specialist, arrived at the attorney's office with files documenting Catalina's 3 prior victims. He was tall with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of steady gaze that came from years of interviewing people who lied for a living. He opened a manila folder and slid 3 case summaries across the table. Catalina Mercer, he said, also known as Christine Brennan in Florida, Chloe Mercado in Connecticut. 3 prior cases of elder financial fraud. I read the summaries. 2018, 82-year-old widower in Boca Raton, defrauded of $400,000, disappeared before prosecution. 2021, 79-year-old retired teacher in Hartford, $260,000, fled to avoid charges. 2022, 76-year-old former physician in New Haven, $500,000, vanished across state lines. Over $1 million. 3 victims, 3 states. We've had a file on her for 4 years, Agent Garrett continued. But elder fraud falls into jurisdictional gap state crimes with federal implications. We couldn't act without evidence of interstate coordination wire fraud or a pattern we could prosecute federally. He paused. Then 6 weeks ago, we received a tip from Wallace Whitfield. And last week, Attorney Caldwell contacted us with your documentation. Celeste leaned forward. Wallace called the FBI in August. Agent Garrett nodded. He reported that his brother was conspiring with a woman matching the description from our Connecticut case. We couldn't verify without evidence, but Wallace's tip put us on alert. He looked at me directly. Mrs. Whitfield, we didn't come here to rescue you. We came because you successfully built the exact file we needed. The metadata, the financial records, the forged documents, the pharmaceutical evidence you did in 2 months, what took us 4 years to attempt. You handed us a prosecutable federal case. You need to understand what it means when an FBI agent tells you that you built their case for them. It means you were never a victim waiting to be saved. It means you were an investigator who happened to be investigating your own life. What happens now? I asked. Now. Agent Garrett said, we coordinate. Your husband filed his conservatorship petition yesterday, October 2nd. The hearing is scheduled for October 16th, 1 day after his planned family ambush on the 15th. I blinked. He filed yesterday afternoon, Celeste confirmed. The court clerk called me this morning. Vernon is proceeding exactly as planned. Agent Garrett pulled out another document, which means we proceed as planned. Mrs. Whitfield, we're going to let your husband walk into that hearing thinking he's about to win. And then we're going to arrest Catalina Mercer on federal wire fraud charges the moment she steps into the courthouse. He slid a manila folder across Celeste's desk with Catalina's photograph paper clipped to the front. Not the polished woman in the crimson blouse from the birthday party, but a Florida booking photo from 2019, younger and harder. Her eyes were cold, calculating. "There's one more thing you need to know about Ms. Mercer," Garrett said, opening the folder to a page marked Prior Associations. He turned it toward me. I read the first line and felt the room tilt. "She didn't find your husband by accident," Garrett said quietly. "She researched his financial profile, his marriage status, his professional background, and your asset portfolio. Then she engineered an introduction through his law firm's paralegal hiring process. This wasn't a chance encounter, Mrs. Whitfield. You were targeted." I stared at the document. It was a background report on Vernon, net worth, real estate holdings, marriage duration, retirement status, all compiled in a single file dated December 2017, 6 months before Catalina was hired at his firm. "She studied you," I said quietly, "like a case file." "Yes," Agent Garrett said. "She's a professional, and you're her fourth mark." But this time the mark fought back. The folder Agent Garrett opened contained a 2019 Florida bar disciplinary notice with Catalina's photograph, younger, harder, wearing a different name, and the moment I saw it, I understood that my husband hadn't found a mistress who would help him steal my life. He'd been found by a professional who did this for a living. I sat in Attorney Celeste Caldwell's office staring at the document. The woman in the photograph looked like Catalina, but the name read Christine Catalina Mercer. Not Catalina Mercer, Christine. Celeste read from the investigative report her team had compiled. Christine Catalina Mercer, Florida Bar Disciplinary Action. March 2019. Found to have forged a client's signature on a real estate deed transfer, fraudulently conveying property worth $600,000. Paralegal certificate permanently revoked. Criminal charges filed but dismissed on procedural grounds. She turned the page. She left Florida 6 months later and resurfaced in Pennsylvania under her middle name only, Catalina Mercer. Clean slate. No disciplinary record because Pennsylvania doesn't cross-check Florida bar actions unless specifically requested. "When did she join Vernon's firm?" I asked. "January 2020, Celeste said. As a paralegal, despite having no valid certification, she worked directly under Vernon for 3 years before his retirement in June 2023. I thought about the timeline. 3 years. Catalina had spent 3 years positioning herself, learning Vernon's patterns, his finances, his vulnerabilities. "Mrs. Whitfield," Celeste said, setting down the report, "your husband thinks he's running this conspiracy, but the woman orchestrating it has done this before, multiple times. He's not her partner. He's her mark." How does it feel to discover your husband of 40 years isn't evil, just stupid? That he didn't orchestrate a brilliant conspiracy, but was seduced into becoming a pawn in someone else's tried and tested fraud playbook. It felt like grief, but a different kind. Not grief for the man I'd lost, but grief for the man who'd never existed in the first place. "My marriage isn't ending because Vernon fell in love with someone else," I said quietly. "It's ending because a professional con artist identified a wealthy, aging attorney with a vulnerable ego and spent 3 years turning him into a weapon against his own wife." Celeste nodded. "Exactly. I left her office at noon and drove home. Vernon's car wasn't in the driveway. He was supposed to be at the golf course, or so he'd said that morning when he kissed my forehead and told me he'd be back by dinner. I sat in my study and opened my laptop, checked my email. Nothing urgent. Then my phone rang, Citizens Bank, Gerald Ashford. I answered. "Before I tell you what happened when Vernon walked into that bank, if you're still following this story, comment A, if you think he knew it was a trap, or B, if you think he walked in blind, and add one short reason why. Please note, some details ahead are recreated for narrative clarity, but the lesson is what matters. Mrs. Whitfield, this is Gerald Ashford from Citizens Bank Rittenhouse." He said, voice formal but urgent. "At 9:23 this morning, an individual presented himself at our branch attempting to file a durable power of attorney bearing your name and signature." I sat up straighter. "Our biometric security protocols flagged it immediately," Gerald continued. Signature analysis failed verification, and he could not produce you for in-person identification as required by your standing security instructions. What happened? I asked. Per your instructions and Pennsylvania state law, we retained the entire document package, photographed all pages, and filed an automatic fraud report with the FBI Financial Crimes Division under the Elder Financial Exploitation Reporting Act. The individual became agitated when informed the filing was rejected and left the premises. We have him on security footage. I closed my eyes, opened them. Who is the individual? I asked, even though I already knew. The documents identified him as Vernon Whitfield, Gerald said, your husband. I set the phone down on my desk. Then I did something I hadn't done in 14 months. I laughed. Not a polite laugh, not a bitter laugh. A genuine, cathartic, absolutely incredulous laugh that started in my chest and worked its way up until I was sitting in my study alone, laughing at the absurdity of what had just happened. Vernon had walked into the bank where I'd spent an hour implementing biometric security specifically designed to catch forged documents, and tried to file the exact power of attorney I knew existed, on the exact date he'd written in his own handwriting, with the exact forged signature I'd already photographed. And the bank had not only rejected it, they documented it, photographed it, reported it to the FBI. He'd walked into a trap I'd spent weeks building, and he'd sprung it perfectly. I picked the phone back up. Gerald, thank you. Please ensure all documentation is preserved and forwarded to the FBI contact I provided. Already done, he said. The fraud report was filed automatically at 9:31 a.m., 8 minutes after the attempt. I hung up and sat in the silence of my study. October 12th, the date Vernon circled in his handwritten note, the day he thought he would own my life. Instead, it became the day he handed the FBI photographic proof of federal fraud. I pulled out my phone and texted Attorney Celeste Caldwell bank-rejected POA filing this morning. Vernon on security footage. FBI automatically notified. Trap successful. Her response came 30 seconds later. Perfect. Confirms he's proceeding blind. Hearing still scheduled October 16th. We strike first October 14th as planned. I set my phone down and stared out the window at the garden Vernon and I had planted in 1987. Hydrangeas in full October bloom. The flagstone path we'd laid together over a long weekend in June. 40 years of marriage. And it was ending not with a romantic betrayal, but with my husband on bank security footage attempting to commit federal document fraud while I sat at home documenting his every move. I sat in my study holding the phone, the echo of Gerald Ashford's voice still in my ear, and realized the significance of what had just happened. Vernon had tried to execute his plan on the exact deadline he'd written, in his own handwriting, walked into the exact bank I'd fortified with biometric security, and was now on federal security footage attempting to commit document fraud. In trying to trap me, he had trapped himself. And in less than 72 hours, I would confront him face to face with every piece of evidence I'd been collecting for 14 months. The board had inverted. The hunter had become the hunted. And Vernon still had no idea. Vernon walked through our front door at 6:47 p.m. on October 12th, 3 hours after the bank rejected his forged power of attorney. And I knew from his pallor and the way his hands shook as he set down his briefcase that he understood everything had gone catastrophically wrong. I sat in the living room, waiting. The evidence was already laid out on the glass coffee table between us. Vernon looked at me, then at the coffee table, then back at me. Loretta, he said, voice strained. The bank made an error this morning, a technical problem. My attorney will handle it. I didn't respond, just waited. And if you don't cooperate, I will file Dr. Stafford's evaluation with the probate court on Monday morning. I have ironclad medical documentation that you are no longer competent to manage your own affairs. I stood, walked to the coffee table, picked up the first document. No, Vernon, I said, voice absolutely calm. You won't. I set down Dr. Stafford's evaluation with red highlights. Because I have Dr. Sylvia Townsend's rebuttal showing Stafford used an outdated protocol Pennsylvania hasn't recognized since 2022. Second document, bank statements. I have your fraudulent withdrawals categorized, cross-referenced, documented. Third document, his handwritten note. I have your note setting your filing deadline, your own handwriting. Fourth document, Wallace's audio file on my phone. I have Wallace's recording from February 7th where you laid out this entire plan. Fifth document, Desmond's metadata printouts. I have Desmond's email metadata showing every deleted message between you and Catalina Mercer. Everything you thought was permanently erased. I looked at him directly. Vernon, I have spent 14 months preparing for this evening. Sit down. He sat. For the first time in our 40-year marriage, Vernon Whitfield had absolutely nothing to say. 40 years of marriage came down to this, me standing over a coffee table covered in evidence, and my husband sitting on the sofa where we used to watch movies together, finally understanding that I had known everything for over a year, and he had walked into a trap of my design. You thought you were 3 steps ahead of me, I said quietly. But I've been watching you since the night I caught you deleting text messages at 2 a.m. Every lie, every withdrawal, every forged signature. I documented all of it, and now the FBI has it too. Vernon's face went gray. The FBI! Agent Conrad Garrett, Elder Fraud Division. They've been tracking Catalina Mercer for 4 years across 3 states. You're not her first victim, Vernon. You're her 4th. She researched our financial profile in December 2017 and engineered her way into your law firm 6 months later. This wasn't love. It was a professional con, and you were the mark. I picked up the final document, Catalina's Florida Bar disciplinary notice. Christine Catalina Mercer, permanently revoked paralegal certificate for forging client signatures. She's done this before Vernon, multiple times, and you thought she loved you. Vernon stared at the photograph, hands shaking. The bank this morning, he said finally. The security flags, were mine. I finished. Biometric authentication, fraud alerts, automatic FBI notification. I set them up 3 weeks ago. You walked into a bank I'd turned into a federal trap, and now you're on security footage attempting to file forged documents. He looked at me like he'd never seen me before. Why didn't you just leave? He asked quietly. Because I wanted you to know, I said. I wanted you to understand exactly how thoroughly you'd been outmaneuvered by the wife you thought was too old, too forgetful, too incompetent to see what you were doing. I walked to the front door and opened it. You need to leave now. This is no longer your home. Vernon stood slowly, picked up his briefcase, walked to the door. He paused at the threshold. Loretta. No, I said. There's nothing left to say. He left. I closed the door behind him and locked it. 2 days later, Sunday, October 14th, Desmond called. I've been monitoring the RH Property Management LLC accounts, he said. Over the past 3 weeks, Catalina transferred $89,000 in small increments into a personal account we can't trace. The last transfer cleared Friday morning, 2 hours before Vernon walked into that bank. I closed my eyes. She knew. She knew. Desmond confirmed. Vernon just left the Old City apartment. I had someone watching. He was inside for 11 minutes. When he came out, he looked broken. He tried calling someone repeatedly. No answer. Loretta. I think she's gone. Catalina cleaned out the apartment and disappeared. You need to understand what happened here. Vernon thought he was the mastermind. Catalina thought she was the predator. But in the end, they both underestimated the quiet woman who spent 32 years running a hospital and knew exactly how to build an unassailable case. Vernon built an entire conspiracy to steal my assets and erase my legal existence. And the woman who seduced him into it, who convinced him to forge my signature drug, my tea, and destroy our 40-year marriage, just took his money and vanished. He thought he was using her. She was using him. And now he was alone. Desmond's surveillance report came through that evening. Vernon sat alone in that empty apartment for 40 minutes just staring at the bare walls where Catalina's furniture used to be. When he finally left, he drove past our house 3 times without stopping like a man circling something he'd lost but couldn't bring himself to enter. He had built his conspiracy to destroy me, and the woman he built it with had destroyed him instead. But Catalina's betrayal was about to become the least shocking revelation of the week. 2 days after Vernon's confrontation in my living room, Dr. Sylvia Townsend called and asked me to come to her office at Philadelphia General immediately, her voice carrying the kind of controlled urgency that told me the blood she'd drawn back in August had revealed exactly what she'd feared. I drove to the hospital through October afternoon traffic and took the elevator to the neurology department. Sylvia was waiting in her office, the door already closed. She handed me a lab report before I even sat down. "Your blood draw from August 15th, she said. Lorazepam concentration 0.8 milligrams per liter. That's exceptionally high for someone who claims they've never taken benzodiazepines. I looked at the numbers on the page. They meant nothing to me. Based on the half-life and accumulation patterns, Sylvia continued, this is consistent with daily ingestion of 1 to 2 milligrams over a minimum of 6 to 8 weeks. Loretta, you were being systematically dosed. The room tilted slightly. I sat down. The symptoms of chronic low-dose lorazepam exposure. Sylvia said, voice clinical now. Memory impairment, difficulty concentrating, spatial confusion, episodes of brain fog, every single symptom Vernon reported to Evangeline and used to justify Dr. Stafford's fake evaluation. He wasn't diagnosing dementia Loretta. He was creating it. She paused. That nightly tea, it was a weapon. The tea. Every single night. Vernon would bring it to our bedroom, still steaming with that concerned husband expression. This will help you sleep better, darling. And I drank it. For 8 weeks, I drank poison brewed by a man I'd trusted for 40 years. I forwarded this pathology to Agent Garrett 48 hours ago, Sylvia said, voice hardening. He called me this morning. The federal investigation has been upgraded from financial fraud and forgery to attempted poisoning under Title 18, Section 1365, tampering with consumer products, and Section 113, assault with intent to do bodily harm. Your husband just crossed the line from white-collar conspiracy into violent felony. She leaned forward. This carries a potential 20-year federal sentence per count. I sat in her office staring at the lab report. The numbers were clinical, precise, damning. Vernon had poisoned me. Not metaphorically, not emotionally, chemically, deliberately, for 8 weeks. Why did you draw my blood in August? I asked quietly. Sylvia met my eyes. Because when you first told me about the nightly tea and Vernon's sudden concern for your sleep, I remembered Trudy Dawson's call about Dr. Stafford asking pharmaceutical questions, and I put it together. If someone wanted to manufacture dementia symptoms, benzodiazepines would be the perfect tool. So I tested you, and I was right. Thank you, I said. Don't thank me, Sylvia said. Just make sure that bastard goes to prison. That evening at 7:30, I sat in Attorney Celeste Caldwell's office with Agent Conrad Garrett across the conference table. The city lights of Philadelphia glowed through the windows behind them. Agent Garrett opened a file folder. Mrs. Whitfield, I need to correct something I said when we first met, he began. I told you the FBI opened this case because you built the file we needed. That's true, but it's not the whole truth. He slid a document across the table. We received our initial tip-off 6 weeks before Attorney Caldwell ever contacted us. From Wallace Whitfield, February 28th. He called the Philadelphia Field Office Financial Crimes Hotline. I stared at the document. It was an FBI intake form, Wallace's name at the top. Agent Garrett read from the case file. Quote, my brother Vernon Whitfield is planning something involving his wife Loretta. He mentioned finding a chemical solution to help her relax more permanently. I don't know what that means, but it doesn't sound right. I recorded our conversation. Unquote. He looked up at me. Wallace didn't fully understand what he was reporting, but he was compromised enough to act. He sent us that audio recording. We opened a preliminary investigation, but elder fraud cases require evidence of harm before we can intervene. We needed you to document the pattern. Wallace gave us the starting point. You gave us the case. I closed my eyes, opened them. He knew, I said. In February, he knew and he didn't tell me. He kept quiet around you because he was terrified that revealing an active federal investigation would either cause you to panic or accidentally tip off Vernon, Agent Garrett said. So he sat on that guilt for 8 months, Mrs. Whitfield. He protected you the only way a 74-year-old retired accountant knew how, with documentation, a recording device, and a federal tip line. Wallace had called the FBI in February. I didn't discover the conspiracy until August. For 6 months, a 74-year-old man carried the weight of knowing his brother was poisoning me, and he chose documentation over family loyalty. That took a kind of courage I hadn't credited him with. "Where is Wallace now?" I asked. "Witness protection protocol," Agent Garrett said. "Not formal WITSEC, but we've moved him to a secure location. His testimony will be critical to the grand jury proceedings." "When is the grand jury?" Celeste asked. 6 days, Agent Garrett said. "October 23rd. We're bringing charges against Vernon Whitfield for attempted poisoning, elder financial exploitation, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Dr. Bryce Stafford for medical fraud, falsifying documents, and conspiracy. And if we can locate Catalina Mercer, she'll face RICO charges for operating a multi-state criminal enterprise." He closed the file. "Mrs. Whitfield, in 6 days of federal grand jury, is going to indict your husband on charges that carry a combined maximum sentence of up to 60 years, 20 years per count of wire fraud and elder financial exploitation, plus additional federal penalties for the poisoning charges. He's 71 years old. If convicted, he will die in federal prison." I looked at Agent Garrett. "Good," I said. I left Attorney Caldwell's office at 9:15 p.m. knowing 3 things: my husband had been poisoning me. The FBI had known for 8 months, and the brother-in-law I'd written off as complicit had been protecting me all along in the only way he knew how. Agent Garrett's final words echoed as I drove home through October darkness. "The federal grand jury convenes in 6 days, Mrs. Whitfield. We're bringing charges against everyone involved." But before the grand jury could meet, my daughter would make a discovery that would shatter what remained of her world. The lorazepam results came back on a Thursday. Wallace called while I stood in my kitchen, the same kitchen where Vernon had poured my tea every morning for 6 years, measuring out poison with the same hands that had held mine on our wedding day. 0.8 milligrams per liter, Wallace said. "Enough to cloud your judgment, slow your speech, make you forget conversations, but never enough to kill you. He needed you functional enough to sign documents, confused enough not to remember." The grand jury was scheduled for 6 days from now. Agent Garrett had assured me Evangeline wouldn't be called as a witness, but I knew my daughter would find out soon. The FBI's investigation would become public record. Her father's name would be attached to words like fraud and conspiracy and elder abuse. I had no idea how soon that discovery would come. The phone rang at 10:43 that night. Evangeline's name lit up my screen, and when I answered, I heard something I hadn't heard since she was 12, my daughter sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe. "Mom, I need to see you. I'm in the car. I'm coming over." She hung up before I could respond. 15 minutes felt like 15 hours. When her headlights finally swept across my windows, I opened the door before she could knock. She collapsed into my arms the moment she stepped inside. Not the careful hug of a daughter who'd been distant for months, but the full-body collapse of someone whose world had just shattered. I held her the way I'd held her when she was small and let her cry. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." "For what, sweetheart?" "For believing him, for thinking you were losing your mind." She pulled back her face, red and streaked with tears. "I found emails on Desmond's laptop. He left it open and I saw Dad's name." She sank onto my sofa, waited. "He called me the naive one." Her voice was flat now, shock settling in where grief had been. In an email to Catalina, he said I was the perfect witness because I'd actually believed the dementia story. Once the court declared you incompetent, I'd testify about how confused you'd been, how you forgot things. He was going to use me to steal everything from you. I thought about Vernon's careful campaign, the way he'd told Evangeline I'd repeated myself at lunch. The way he'd mentioned I'd forgotten my own grandson's name. The way he'd positioned her as a concerned witness to my supposed decline. He hadn't just been stealing my money, he'd been stealing my daughter. How do you forgive that? Not the fraud or the forgery or even the poison in the tea, but taking a mother's relationship with her child and weaponizing it. Turning my daughter's love for me into evidence against me. Making her an accomplice without her knowledge, without her consent. You didn't know, I said. My voice was steady, but my hands were shaking. You were protecting someone you trusted. That's not naive. That's normal. But I should have seen it. You tried to tell me about the money, and I thought you were confused. She covered her face. I helped him. Without even knowing it, I helped him try to destroy you. And now you know the truth. I took her hands and lowered them so she had to look at me. That's what matters. You know, and you're here. And we're going to be okay. She stayed until after midnight. We made tea, real tea, untainted, and I told her everything. The navy blue notebook, the forged documents, Dr. Stafford's gambling debts, and Catalina's criminal history, the FBI informant who turned out to be her own brother. When I finished, she said, I want to help, whatever you need. 2 days later, Desmond found the iPad. He called me at 7:15 on a gray November morning. Loretta, I need you to come over. Now. Don't call Evangeline yet. I want you to see this first. He was waiting in his home office when I arrived, Clover's pink iPad open on his desk. I was setting up her new tablet and decided to back up her old one first. When I opened the cloud storage, I found this. He pressed play. The video was date-stamped August 22nd, Clover's birthday party. The angle was odd, pointed mostly at the ceiling, catching glimpses of balloon strings and the corner of a window. Background noise, children laughing, adults chatting, the faint strains of Happy Birthday, and then crystal clear Vernon's voice. October 15th. Loretta has an appointment with Stafford at 2. We'll have her declared incompetent by 3, and you'll be at the bank by 4 with the power of attorney. They close at 5, so we have a 1-hour window. Catalina's voice smooth and confident, and if she fights it, she won't. Stafford's evaluation will say she lacks capacity to contest. By the time she realizes what's happening, her accounts will be empty. You never think a birthday party will become a crime scene. You never think your 4-year-old granddaughter adjusting her iPad to record herself blowing out candles will accidentally capture a conspiracy instead. But sometimes justice doesn't come from lawyers or investigators or elaborate plans. Sometimes it comes from a child who just wanted to remember her birthday. The video ran 4 minutes and 14 seconds. Desmond had already sent it to Agent Garrett, who'd sent it to the forensic audio team who'd confirmed every word was admissible. Clover had been sleeping in the next room, completely unaware that her birthday present to herself had just become federal evidence. This is it, Desmond said quietly. This is everything the FBI needs. Vernon's voice, Catalina's voice, the date, the plan. It's a 20-year sentence on a silver platter. I watched the video 3 more times. Watched the balloon strings drift in and out of frame. Heard my granddaughter's voice in the background, asking someone to watch her blow out the candles. Heard my husband plot my destruction while children ate cake 10 feet away. Agent Garrett called an hour later. Mrs. Whitfield, we need to meet today. There's something else you need to know. His voice carried a weight I hadn't heard before. Not the confidence of a man with an airtight case, but something heavier. What is it? Not over the phone. I'm coming to you. There's been a development with Catalina, something that changes the tactical landscape. He arrived at noon, and the expression on his face told me everything I needed to know. Whatever he'd learned, it was going to hurt. I learned about Catalina's pregnancy the same week the FBI finished building their poisoning case and discovered that justice sometimes demands we separate the innocent from the guilty, even when they share the same bloodline. Agent Garrett sat across from me in Celeste Caldwell's conference room, his expression carefully neutral. Celeste had insisted on the meeting at her office rather than my home. Professional setting, she'd said. Strategic distance from the emotional epicenter. Mrs. Whitfield, we've confirmed Catalina is 4 months pregnant, Garrett said. The timeline means conception occurred during the active poisoning period. I set down my coffee cup with steady hands. So he was planning a new family while ending mine. We believe the pregnancy gives us leverage, Garrett continued. Vernon may confess to protect his child from having both parents incarcerated. Federal prosecutors are prepared to offer a reduced sentence if he pleads guilty and testifies against Catalina's broader fraud operation. Celeste leaned forward. Loretta, this could complicate your victim impact statement. The defense will use the pregnancy for sympathy. They'll paint Vernon as a father-to-be, not a would-be killer. The child is innocent, I said. My voice was calm, measured. But this changes nothing about what they did to me. Garrett nodded. That's the response we hoped for. The preliminary hearing is scheduled for 3 days from now. Both Vernon and Catalina will be present. You'll need to testify under oath about the poisoning timeline, the physical symptoms, the pattern of deterioration. It won't be easy. Nothing about this has been easy. Celeste gathered her notes. The iPad video is admissible. Dr. Townsend's blood work is admissible. Wallace's testimony about the FBI investigation is admissible. You have everything you need to win this case without mercy. But mercy kept surfacing in my thoughts as I drove home. Not mercy for Vernon, he'd forfeited that when he measured lorazepam into my tea, but mercy for the child who would grow up knowing their father had tried to murder their half-sibling's grandmother. The child who would carry Vernon's name and Vernon's crimes into a world that wouldn't separate the two. I thought about Vernon's excitement when I'd been pregnant with Wallace 40 years ago. The way he'd pressed his ear to my stomach counting kicks. The way he'd held my hand through 18 hours of labor, whispering promises about forever. The way he'd cried when the doctor placed our son in his arms. The man who'd promised me forever was now creating another forever with someone else, while planning my death. How does love curdle into that not overnight, not in one decision, but across decades of taking someone for granted, of assuming their loyalty was infinite, of mistaking partnership for servitude? Vernon had looked at our 40-year marriage and seen not a bond to honor, but an obstacle to remove, and now he'd created new life while trying to end mine. I pulled into my driveway at 6:30. Vernon's car was already there, parked in the spot he'd always used as if he still belonged. He was waiting on the front steps. No lawyer, no Catalina. Just Vernon looking haggard and desperate in a way I'd never seen during 4 decades of marriage. Loretta, please, I need to talk to you. I should have told him to leave. Should have called Celeste, called the FBI, enforced the boundaries everyone had told me to maintain. Instead, I unlocked the door and walked inside. He followed me to the kitchen, the same kitchen where we'd shared 40 years of morning coffee, where he'd poured poison into my tea while asking about my day, where I'd confronted him about the affair and he'd looked me in the eye and lied. I'm begging you, Vernon said. His voice cracked. Talk to the FBI, tell them it was all Catalina. Tell them I was manipulated. Our grandchildren need their grandfather. This baby needs a father. I let him finish. Let him appeal to our history, our family, the mercy I'd supposedly want if our roles were reversed. Let him paint himself as victim instead of architect. When he finally stopped talking, I studied him, really looked at him for the first time in months. His hands were shaking. His wedding ring was still on his finger, the same ring I'd placed there in 1983. Catalina's perfume clung to his collar, jasmine cutting through the familiar scent of his aftershave. The kitchen clock ticked behind him, the same clock we'd bought when we moved to this house in 1985, back when we were still building a life instead of destroying one. 40 years, Loretta, he whispered. Doesn't that count for something? Doesn't mercy mean anything to you? I thought about mercy, about the mercy he'd shown me when he dissolved poison into my morning routine, about the mercy he'd shown our children when he planned to steal their inheritance, about the mercy he'd shown our 40-year marriage when he started a new family while trying to end our old one. The law will decide your fate, I said, not your wife. You stopped being my husband the day you chose poison over partnership. Leave this house. Don't come back. He stared at me like I was a stranger, like he'd expected forgiveness, expected intervention, expected me to save him the way I'd saved our marriage 1,000 times before. Expected me to be the woman he'd married, not the woman he'd created by betraying her. "You've changed," he said finally. "No, you just never knew me at all." I walked to the front door and opened it. He left without another word. I closed the door on Vernon's retreating figure and realized I'd just closed the door on 40 years of my life. In 3 days, I would sit across from him in a federal courtroom, no longer as his wife, but as the woman whose testimony could send him to prison for 2 decades. The preliminary hearing would force me to speak aloud under oath every detail of how the man I'd loved had tried to kill me. And this time, there would be no mercy left to give. The federal judge entered chambers precisely at 9 a.m., and I watched my husband's attorney stand to argue I was too mentally incompetent to manage my own life, the same life Vernon had spent 6 months trying to end. Judge Helena Rourke, a sharp-eyed woman in her early 60s who'd spent 2 decades on the federal bench, entered chambers with the kind of precision that told you she'd already read every word of the briefs. Celeste sat beside me at the plaintiff's table, her leather portfolio open to a tab marked Rebuttal Evidence. Across the aisle, Vernon sat pale and stiff beside his counsel. Dr. Stafford occupied the row behind him, looking like he wished he were anywhere else. Evangeline and Desmond sat in the gallery behind me. My daughter had reached for my hand as we'd entered the courtroom. I'd squeezed it once and let go. "Your Honor." Vernon's attorney began, "My client seeks emergency conservatorship based on medical evidence that Mrs. Whitfield suffers from progressive dementia, rendering her unable to manage her financial affairs. Dr. Bryce Stafford's comprehensive evaluation conclusively demonstrates Dr. Stafford's evaluation," Celeste interrupted, standing, "is fraudulent. May I present rebuttal evidence?" Judge Rourke gestured for her to proceed. Celeste didn't raise her voice. Didn't need to. She presented 5 exhibits in 11 minutes. The invalid MMSE protocol. Dr. Stafford's lack of neurological credentials, the toxicology reports proving chemical-induced symptoms, Wallace's audio recordings of Vernon discussing the conspiracy in Clover's birthday video with its crystal-clear audio of Vernon and Catalina planning the October 15th ambush. Furthermore, Celeste said, "Mrs. Whitfield's cognitive function has returned to baseline following cessation of systematic lorazepam poisoning administered by her husband over an 18-month period. The confusion Mr. Whitfield attributed to dementia was induced deliberately and criminally." Judge Rourke's expression didn't change, but I saw her knuckles whiten on the bench. "Petition denied," she said. Furthermore, this court is ordering a comprehensive federal investigation into Mr. Vernon Whitfield for elder abuse, grand larceny, and attempted poisoning. Dr. Stafford, you will remain in this courtroom. Federal agents are waiting to escort you for questioning. Vernon's attorney tried to object. The judge silenced him with a look. "Your client didn't just try to steal her money," Celeste said, turning to face opposing counsel. "He tried to steal her mind, her agency, and her life. The evidence speaks for itself." Across the aisle, Vernon looked at me. For the first time in 40 years, he actually saw me. Not the wife who managed his household, not the mother who raised his children, not the convenience he'd taken for granted for 4 decades. He saw the woman who documented every lie gathered, every receipt, turned his own conspiracy into evidence, and dismantled his entire plan in a federal courtroom in 11 minutes. The man I'd married 40 years ago had looked through me for decades. The stranger across the courtroom aisle finally saw me, but only because a federal judge had just ordered his arrest. Dr. Stafford broke in the courthouse corridor 20 minutes later. Agent Garrett had pulled him into a third-floor conference room. Celeste and I watched through the glass partition as Stafford's shoulders sagged. His hands shook his entire facade of professional credibility, crumbled into what it had always been, a man who'd sold diagnoses for cash. He signed the federal proffer agreement at 10:15 a.m. She paid me $25,000 cash. Stafford said, his voice barely audible through the door. Said there would be more after the conservatorship went through. I didn't know about the poisoning. I swear I didn't know. But he'd known about the fraud. known about the forged evaluation, known about the 2 prior cases in Pennsylvania where he'd provided similarly fraudulent incompetency diagnoses for a fee. The medical board would strip his license by end of week. The federal proffer would spare him prison in exchange for testimony against Catalina and Vernon. First domino just cleared the board, Agent Garrett said, stepping into the corridor. Next up is Ms. Mercer. It's 10:17 a.m. Where is she? I asked. That's the interesting part. She hasn't been seen since the hearing was scheduled. We have alerts at all major transit hubs. She'll surface. She surfaced 3 days later at Philadelphia International Airport. I was standing in my kitchen when Agent Garrett called at 4:30 in the afternoon. The same kitchen where Vernon had begged for mercy. The same kitchen where he'd poured poison into my tea for 18 months. The same kitchen where I'd closed the door on our marriage and walked away. We intercepted her at Gate A15, Garrett said. Valid passport under her legal name Christine Catalina Mercer. $43,000 in cash prenatal records, one-way ticket to Cancun. She used her real identity because she didn't know we had a federal warrant. She thought only the state fraud charges were active. Third time, I said. Excuse me. Third attempted flight from a state fraud investigation. Florida in 2019, Connecticut in 2022, now Philadelphia in 2023. She has a pattern. She does, Garrett confirmed. And this time, federal warrants don't stop at state lines. She's done running. I thought about Catalina's performance over the past year, the grief-stricken mistress who'd loved Vernon so desperately she'd helped him commit fraud, the pregnant girlfriend who just wanted a father for her child, the woman who'd wept in my living room and called me a bitter old fool who couldn't accept that Vernon had moved on. All of it calculated, all of it scripted. A professional con operation targeting elderly spouses with assets to steal and reputations to protect. She asked for one thing before processing, Garrett said. Notify Vernon that she tried. Not my concern, I said, and ended the call. 3 dominoes: the doctor who sold the diagnosis, the husband who bought the lie, the mistress who scripted both. In 72 hours, all 3 had fallen exactly where the evidence said they would. Vernon, Dr. Stafford, and Catalina were in federal custody. The fraud charges were filed. The poisoning case was airtight. But as I stood in my kitchen that evening, the same kitchen where Vernon had begged for mercy 3 days before, I realized the hardest part wasn't the courtroom victory. It was deciding what mercy actually looked like when the law asked me to speak at their sentencing hearing in 6 weeks. Vernon would beg again. Catalina would use the pregnancy, and I would have to decide whether justice meant maximum sentences or something more complicated than revenge. $338,000, that was the exact price Vernon paid for 8 months of Thursday nights in a secret Old City apartment with a woman half his age. The forensic audit landed on Celeste's desk 6 weeks after Vernon's arrest. We sat in her conference room on a cold November afternoon, and she walked me through the spreadsheet line by line. 42 separate transactions, 8 months of calculated withdrawals from our shared retirement portfolio, each one authorized under Vernon's joint account access, each one routed through 3 different transfers to obscure the paper trail. The forensic audit traced every dollar, Celeste said. 8 months, 42 separate drawdowns, $338,000 from your retirement accounts to fund his affair. I stared at the numbers. Dates, amounts, routing codes. February through September. The same 8 months he'd been poisoning my tea and telling Evangeline I was losing my mind. He stole our future to pay for his present, I said. The court agrees. Judge Rourke issued an expedited clawback order this morning. The full amount transfers to your sole custody as misappropriated marital capital. Vernon's liquidating equity shares to cover his defense costs now. He won't contest it. The money appeared in my account 30 days later. I watched the numbers populate in my banking app while standing in the same kitchen where Vernon had begged for mercy. $338,000 returned in a single electronic transfer, as if 8 months of calculated lies could be reversed with the push of a button. But numbers don't lie even when people do. The spreadsheet told a story Vernon's words never could. This wasn't impulse or midlife crisis or a moment of weakness. This was 42 deliberate decisions spread across 8 months each, withdrawal, a small betrayal that added up to the complete dismantling of a marriage. Celeste called the next week. Vernon's entering a plea. December 4th, courtroom 6A. Judge Rourke will preside. You don't have to attend, but I thought you'd want to know. I attended. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected for something that would reshape the rest of my life. Evangeline sat to my left, Desmond to my right. Vernon stood before Judge Rourke in a gray suit I'd helped him pick out 3 Christmases ago, back when I still believed we had a future worth dressing for. Mr. Whitfield. Judge Rourke said, "You are charged with 3 federal counts: elder financial fraud conspiracy to commit wire fraud and reckless endangerment. How do you plead?" "Guilty, Your Honor." His voice was steady. "I plead guilty to all 3 counts." No drama. No last-minute reversal. Just 2 words that ended 40 years of marriage and guaranteed he'd spend the next portion of his life in federal prison. "Your Honor." Vernon said, "May I address the gallery?" Judge Rourke hesitated, then nodded. Vernon turned to face us, to face me. His eyes were red-rimmed, his hands clasped in front of him like he was praying. "I genuinely loved Loretta for the first 30 years, he said. "I don't know when or how I became the man who did this. I don't know when taking her for granted became resenting her competence, when partnership became competition, when I started seeing her strength as a threat instead of the reason I married her." He paused, swallowed hard. "That doesn't excuse it. Nothing excuses poisoning someone's tea, forging their medical records, planning to steal their life savings. But it is the truth. I loved her, and then I didn't. And instead of being honest about that, I tried to destroy her. I'm sorry doesn't cover it. I'm guilty does." The courtroom was silent. Everyone expected tears. Evangeline had brought tissues. Desmond squeezed my hand. Even the court clerk glanced my way, waiting for the breakdown. The catharsis, the moment where 40 years of marriage demanded some visible grief. I sat in that wooden pew, dry-eyed. Because grief is finite and mine had run out somewhere between the poison and the plea, between discovering the lorazepam in my bloodstream and watching federal agents arrest the man who'd put it there, between loving someone for 30 years and realizing the last 10 had been a sustained campaign to erase me. 30 years of truth cannot erase 10 years of calculated betrayal. I didn't shed a single tear. Judge Rourke set the sentencing hearing for mid-January, 45 days out. The courtroom emptied slowly. Evangeline hugged me in the corridor. Desmond offered to drive me home. I declined both and walked to my car alone. The prosecutor caught me in the parking garage. A woman in her 40s named Rachel Brennan, carrying a leather folder I'd come to recognize as the case file that held every detail of Vernon's crimes. "Mrs. Whitfield, I need to provide you with this." She handed me a single-page form. "Victim Impact Statement. You have the right to address the court at sentencing. It's due 3 weeks before the hearing. January 2nd deadline." I looked at the blank form. A dozen lines. Space for me to explain in my own words how Vernon's actions had affected my life, my health, my sense of safety, my future. Space for me to recommend a sentence. Space for me to advocate for mercy or demand the maximum 20 years federal guidelines allowed. "Thank you," I said. Rachel hesitated. "For what it's worth, Mrs. Whitfield's allocution was unusually honest. Most defendants minimize. He didn't. That doesn't change what he did, but it might inform what you write." I drove home with the form on my passenger seat. Vernon's guilty plea meant sentencing would come in 45 days. The prosecutor had handed me the power to influence that sentence. And I realized that for all the courtroom victories and recovered dollars, I still had to decide the one thing the law couldn't answer for me, whether the man who loved me for 30 years deserved mercy, for the 10 he spent trying to erase me. 40 years of marriage reduced to 3 sheets of heavy bond paper, and I signed my maiden name, Loretta Jean Crawford, for the first time since August 1983. The victim impact statement could wait. The divorce decree could not. Celeste had called 3 days after Vernon's guilty plea with news that the dissolution proceedings were moving with exceptional speed. No contested assets, no custody disputes, no leverage left for a man who'd just pleaded guilty to 3 federal counts of fraud and endangerment. Vernon forfeited all leverage when he entered that guilty plea, Celeste said, sliding the final documents across her conference table. The dissolution moved faster than any 40-year marriage I've seen. I read the terms slowly. Full title to the Chestnut Hill house. $950,000 untouched in my personal trust, protected by the prenuptial agreement Vernon had signed without reading. The clawbacks secured. An additional $47,000 from joint accounts transferred to my sole custody. Vernon's remaining assets after criminal defense retainers under $200,000. 40 years ago, Vernon had been the successful executive with the corner office and the generous salary. I'd been the young hospital administrator still climbing towards COO, bringing home 60% of his income. He'd made me feel like I was marrying up. Now the financial tables had completely reversed. I was walking away with over $1.3 million. He was walking away with legal bills and a federal sentencing hearing. "This is your Independence Day, Loretta," Celeste said, sliding the final page toward me. "Sign here." I signed Loretta Jean Crawford in black ink. The name felt foreign and familiar at the same time. The woman I'd been before Vernon, the woman I'd become after him, the same person separated by 40 years and 3 sheets of heavy bond paper. The house felt different when I walked through it that evening. Vernon's belongings were completely cleared, his clothes, his books, his golf clubs, the aftershave that had clung to every bathroom towel for 40 years. The architecture was identical, same crown molding, same hardwood floors, same garden view through bay windows. But the air itself had changed like opening windows after 40 years of holding your breath. Evangeline arrived at 6 with Clover in tow. My granddaughter bounded across the hardwood floors, her pink sneakers squeaking on the polished wood. "Grandma, we're having dinner here tonight," she called. "Just us." "Just us," I agreed. Evangeline caught my eye across the hallway. "It feels different now," she said quietly. "Lighter." "It is lighter," I said, 300 pounds lighter. She laughed, the first real laugh I'd heard from my daughter in over a year. We made dinner together in the kitchen. Pasta with marinara garlic bread, the kind of simple meal that doesn't require recipes or planning. Clover chattered about her preschool class, about the new tablet Desmond had set up with parental controls, about whether we could get a dog now that Grandpa wasn't allergic anymore. I didn't tell her that Vernon had never been allergic to dogs. He just never wanted the inconvenience. After they left, I stood alone in the kitchen and brewed tea. Real tea, not the drugged version Vernon had served me for 18 months. I filled the kettle myself, measured the leaves myself, poured the water myself. Watched the steam rise from the cup with no one else's hands touching anything. The smallest, most important thing, I'd reclaimed brewing tea completely by myself, no other hands touching the leaves. Wallace arrived 2 days later. I hadn't expected him. Vernon's older brother had done his duty, provided the FBI evidence, testified when required, maintained the distance that treason against family demands. But he stood on my front porch in early evening hat, in hands, looking like a man who'd come to settle accounts. "Loretta, I need to apologize," he said. "I hesitated for months when you first came to me about the money. I was loyal to the wrong person." "Wallace, you did the right thing when the stakes were highest," I said. "That is what matters. I should have believed you from the start, should have seen what Vernon was doing, should have protected you instead of protecting my brother." I gestured him inside. We sat in the living room where he'd first listened to my suspicions about the missing funds, back when I'd still thought this was about an affair and financial carelessness rather than conspiracy and attempted murder. "You chose truth over blood," I said. "Do you know how rare that is? How difficult?" Wallace was 74 years old, and for the first time I saw him not as Vernon's older brother, but as the man who chose truth over blood when it cost him everything. That kind of courage has no age limit. That kind of integrity doesn't expire with youth. "Loretta, I think you were always the strongest person in this family," he said, eyes welling. "Just took the rest of us 40 years to realize it." After he left, I walked to my study and opened the desk drawer. The navy blue notebook sat exactly where I'd left it 14 months ago, its pages filled with dates and symptoms and dollar amounts. Every morning, Vernon had poured my tea. Every afternoon, I documented the fog, the tremors, the memory lapses. Every evening, I'd recorded what I could remember before the lorazepam stole the next day. I'd kept it as insurance, then evidence, then proof I wasn't losing my mind. But tonight, standing in a house that was finally completely mine, I realized I didn't need proof anymore. The courts had delivered their verdict. The forensic auditors had traced every dollar. The toxicologists had confirmed every suspicion. The FBI had built their case. Justice had been served. The navy blue notebook sat on my desk, 14 months of date symptoms, dollar amounts, every poisoning detail documented in my own handwriting. I'd carried it like armor, like evidence, like the only thing standing between sanity and erasure. But tonight I realized I didn't need it anymore. Tonight I would burn it and decide what came after justice. What came after 40 years? What came after surviving the man who'd promised to love me until death, his preference do us part? I'd waited 12 years to see the Atlantic from this particular stretch of New Jersey coast, and when I finally arrived, divorce papers filed, justice served, notebook ashes scattered, I discovered the ocean had waited for no one. I burned the navy blue notebook on a Tuesday evening in my fireplace. 14 months of documentation reduced to ash in 11 minutes. I watched each page curl and blacken, watched the dates and dollar amounts disappear into smoke, watched the evidence of my own survival transform into something I could sweep away. When the last ember died, I booked the Cape May trip I'd been postponing since 2011. Vernon had always preferred mountains to coastlines, summer to winter, his schedule to mine. For 12 years, I'd suggested the Atlantic. For 12 years, he'd redirected us to Colorado in July, to Vermont in October, to destinations that fit his calendar and his preferences. I'd stopped suggesting it around 2018, stopped asserting my own wants somewhere in the space between our 35th and 40th anniversaries. The boutique hotel sat 3 blocks from the shore, all weathered cedar shingles and white trim. I checked in on a Thursday afternoon in late December, 3 days before Christmas, when Cape May emptied of summer tourists and filled with nothing but winter wind and the kind of silence that doesn't apologize for existing. My room had a private balcony overlooking the beach. I woke at dawn on Friday, brewed coffee in the small kitchenette, measuring the grounds myself, pouring the water myself, touching every part of the process with my own hands, and carried the mug outside. The December Atlantic was gray and restless. Waves rolled in with a rhythm that predated human civilization, would continue long after every courthouse and conspiracy and 40-year marriage dissolved into history. The air tasted like salt and cold. The wind bit through my sweater and raised goosebumps on my arms. The horizon stretched endless and indifferent. My phone buzzed. A text from Trudy Ashford, my former colleague from Philadelphia General, the woman who'd covered my shifts when I'd been too fog-brained to trust myself with patient charts. Have you seen the morning edition Philadelphia Inquirer ran a full layout? They're calling you the hospital executive who outwitted the fraudsters. Your famous Loretta. I opened the link she'd attached. The headline read exactly as she'd quoted. Below it, a photograph of me leaving the federal courthouse after Vernon's guilty plea. The article outlined the conspiracy, the poisoning, the 18-month investigation, the courtroom victory. It called me methodical, resilient, courageous. I read it once, smiled faintly, and placed the phone face down on the balcony table. The waves were louder than the headline, colder than the praise, entirely indifferent to whether I'd survived the poisoning or succumbed to it. And I found immense comfort in that complete disregard. The December Atlantic was nothing like Vernon. It made no promises, demanded no accommodation, gave no false assurances. It simply moved according to tides that preceded my birth and would continue long after my death. That constancy felt more honest than 40 years of vows, more reliable than any man who'd pledged forever and measured out 18 months of poison. I sat on that balcony for 3 hours, watched the tide shift, counted waves until the numbers lost meaning, felt the December wind turn my coffee cold and didn't care enough to go inside for a fresh cup. A jogger passed on the beach below, barely visible in the morning gray. A dog chased gulls near the waterline. A couple walked hand in hand near the surf, their laughter carried away by wind before it could reach my balcony. Life continued. The ocean continued. I continued. 12 years I'd postponed this trip because Vernon preferred mountains to coastlines, summer to winter, his schedule to mine. The ocean didn't notice my absence. It didn't notice my return. It didn't care that I'd spent 14 months documenting my husband's attempt to erase me, didn't care that I'd won. In federal court, didn't care that the Philadelphia Inquirer called me the woman who outwitted the fraudsters. The Atlantic just kept moving, kept rolling, kept existing with or without my witness. And somehow that indifference felt like the first honest relationship I'd had in years. I thought about the navy blue notebook burning in my fireplace, thought about Vernon's guilty plea, thought about Celeste sliding divorce papers across her conference table and saying, "This is your Independence Day." Thought about the victim impact statement still sitting blank on my desk at home, due in 9 days, waiting for me to decide what mercy looked like when the law asked me to quantify my suffering in 12 lines or less. I thought about all of it, and then I let the wind take those thoughts the same way it took the couple's laughter away, somewhere I didn't need to follow. What does strength actually mean when you've survived something that should have killed you? Is it the courtroom victory, the recovered assets, the headline calling you clever, or is it sitting here alone with coffee? You brood yourself watching waves that will never know your name, and finding peace in the fact that survival doesn't require applause, just requires you to keep breathing when the ocean doesn't care either way. I'd spent 14 months gathering evidence, 6 weeks fighting in court, 40 years being someone's wife. And somewhere in the space between the poison and the verdict, I'd started believing that justice was the finish line, that winning meant the story was over. But sitting on that balcony watching the December Atlantic refuse to acknowledge my existence, I realized I'd been asking the wrong question all along. The question wasn't what came after justice. It was what came after survival. Could I build a life that wasn't defined by what I'd escaped, but by what I chose next? Could I become someone other than Vernon's ex-wife, other than the woman who'd outwitted the fraudsters, other than the victim who documented her own poisoning in a navy blue notebook I'd already burned? Could I just be Loretta Jean Crawford, 68 years old, drinking cold coffee on a New Jersey balcony in December, watching an ocean that didn't need me to survive in order to keep moving? I sat there until the coffee went cold and the December sun dropped below the horizon. Somewhere between the 7th wave and the 70th, I realized the answer wasn't in the courtroom or the divorce decree or the headline that called me courageous. The answer was in the next choice, and the choice after that, and all the choices I'd make once I stopped fighting and started living. The Cartier bracelet sat in my coat pocket as Evangeline and Clover walked toward me across the Cape May sand, the same piece of gold that had started everything now returned by federal court as recovered stolen property waiting for its final transformation. I'd called them that morning from my balcony. "Come join me," I'd said. "Bring Clover. I want to show you both something." They arrived by late afternoon, Evangeline in a burgundy coat, Clover bundled in pink winter layers. My granddaughter ran across the sand, her sneakers leaving prints the tide would erase by morning. "Grandma, are we going swimming?" "Too cold for swimming," I said, catching her in a hug, "but perfect for walking." We walked the tide line as the December sun dropped toward the horizon, painting the sky orange and purple. The breeze carried salt and seaweed. Clover collected shells, each one examined with 4-year-old seriousness before being declared worthy of keeping. Evangeline walked beside me, our shoulders nearly touching. We didn't talk much. The ocean provided all the conversation required, wave after wave, the same sound humans had been listening to since we first stood upright and looked at water. "Thank you for calling us," Evangeline said finally. "Me too," I said. We found a driftwood log 50 yards down the beach, bleached white by sun and salt. Clover climbed up first, then Evangeline lifted her onto her lap. I sat beside them, the three of us facing the Atlantic as it performed its eternal task of moving water with complete indifference to human affairs. 3 generations of women standing at the edge of the continent, the oldest who'd survived poison, the middle who'd brought tissues to courtrooms, the youngest who knew none of it yet, and the ocean that connected us all had witnessed worse betrayals and better redemptions than mine for 1,000 years before I arrived. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the bracelet. The gold caught the fading sunlight, 22 linked pieces, forming a circle that had once symbolized everything wrong with my marriage. Vernon had purchased it with stolen money, given it to Catalina while telling me he was working late. The receipt had been the first tangible proof that my instincts weren't dementia, weren't paranoia, weren't confused delusions. Evangeline's eyes widened. "Is that—" "Yes," I said. "Federal court returned it after asset recovery. I could have sold it. But I realized it meant something else now." I held it up, watching how the links moved against each other, flexible and strong at once. "This piece of jewelry was the first thing that showed me the truth," I said. "Let it remain with you now as a reminder that truth always finds a way to surface." I fastened the gold links around Evangeline's wrist. The clasp clicked shut with a soft sound that got lost in the ocean's roar. My daughter looked down at the bracelet, touching each link with careful fingers. "Mom, I can't—" "You can," I said. "You will. It doesn't belong to Vernon and Catalina anymore. It doesn't belong to the fraud or the conspiracy. It belongs to us now, to truth, to survival, to the fact that we're sitting here together watching the Atlantic instead of standing in a cemetery mourning what he tried to do." Evangeline's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "It's beautiful." "It is now," I agreed. Clover leaned forward, reaching for the bracelet with curious fingers. "It's so pretty, Grandma. Where did you buy it?" The question was pure 4-year-old curiosity, innocent and direct. I felt Evangeline tense beside me, waiting to see how I'd answer. I smiled at the water, pulling my coat closer against the December wind. "That is a very long story, Clover," I said. "I'll tell you all about it when you're older." And I would. Someday, when she was old enough to understand betrayal and resilience, I would tell her everything. About the navy blue notebook, about the lorazepam, about the federal courtroom where her great-grandfather pleaded guilty, and her grandmother sat dry-eyed because grief has limits, but survival doesn't. But today, watching her chase seagulls in the dusk, I only wanted her to know the ocean, and the laughter, not yet the survival. She had time to learn about darkness. Today could stay in the light. "Can I have a bracelet when I'm bigger?" Clover asked. "You can have anything you earn," I told her, "and everything you choose." We sat on that driftwood log as the sun touched the horizon and turned the Atlantic into liquid gold. The temperature dropped, but none of us moved. Evangeline's hand found mine. The bracelet glinted on her wrist. Clover hummed a song from her kindergarten class, a melody that had nothing to do with fraud or conspiracies or 40-year marriages that ended in federal court. I thought about the question I'd been asking since Vernon's arrest. What comes after justice? What comes after survival? What comes after 40 years of being someone's wife and 14 months of being someone's target? The answer wasn't complicated. What came after was this: a beach at dusk, a daughter wearing a bracelet transformed from betrayal to legacy, a granddaughter collecting shells and ocean that didn't care whether I'd survived but kept moving anyway. What came after was choosing to be here instead of anywhere else, choosing to give the bracelet instead of selling it, choosing to call my daughter instead of sitting alone with my vindication. What came after was every choice I'd make from this moment forward, none of them dictated by Vernon's schedule, or Vernon's preferences, or Vernon's attempt to erase me. I didn't know the exact moment healing began, couldn't pinpoint the day or hour when survival became something more than just breathing. But sitting here between the roar of the Atlantic and the sound of my granddaughter's laughter, I no longer needed to look back. The bracelet was on Evangeline's wrist where it belonged. The ocean was indifferent as ever, and I was 68 years old with a life I'd chosen instead of a marriage I'd survived. That was enough. And to you listening to my story, remember this: the truth always finds a way to surface even when someone you love tries to bury it. Looking back, my biggest mistake wasn't ignoring the early warning signs, it was doubting my own instincts when everyone else, including my own daughter, told me I was confused. Don't make my mistake. If something feels wrong in your gut, trust that feeling. Document what you see. Question what doesn't add up. Your clarity is not confusion, no matter what anyone tries to tell you. The lesson I learned is that revenge isn't about anger. It's about reclaiming what was taken with methodical precision. Many revenge-cheating stories end in chaos and regret, but mine ended in a courtroom where evidence spoke louder than emotion. I believe God gave me the strength to document every detail when I could have crumbled, to trust the legal system when I could have sought my own justice. These revenge-cheating stories that end well are about patience proof and trusting that truth will prevail in its own time. What would you have done in my position? Would you have fought through the courts or walked away when the evidence became too heavy? Drop a comment with your thoughts. I read everyone. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already, subscribed to Her Vengeance for more stories of resilience and justice. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time means more than you know. As a final reminder, some details have been fictionalized for storytelling purposes. What I hope you take away is the lesson your instincts matter. Documentation saves lives, and justice, though delayed, is always worth fighting for.